Chairman, I've been party to a couple conversations.
It's 12:34-ish on Tuesday, March 19th, 2019. We are gathered in the City Center Conference Room at 351 West Center Street, Provo, Utah. This meeting is being broadcast live on the web on the Provo City Council YouTube channel, where it will also be available for on-demand viewing. Please be aware that the microphones in the room pick up the noise of paper and other rustling objects. Further, be aware that the microphones can pick up side conversations. We will begin with a roll call. Mr. Strachan.
Cliff Strachan.
Brian Jones.
Jerry Winterton.
George Hanvin. Dave Sewell.
David Harding.
Hey, Van Buren.
Dave Connect.
Mayor Kafusi.
Isaac Paxman.
We will begin with an opening prayer provided by Mr. Cliff Strachan.
Our Father in heaven, we thank Thee this day that we get to participate in the service of this city. We're grateful, Father, for the opportunity to live and work and recreate here in Provo. We're grateful for the blessings that we enjoy as citizens of this country and of this city. We pray, Father, that as the council deliberates the issues before them, that Thy wisdom will rest upon each council member as they talk about and consider these issues and make decisions. We're grateful, Father, for our opportunity to serve. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Cliff. It is proposed that we approve the minutes from November 27, 2018. These are work meeting minutes. Are there any objections or requested changes? Seeing none, I will declare the minutes approved by unanimous consent. Although this is a public meeting, only presenters and those seated at the council table may speak or ask questions unless otherwise invited by a chair. We will begin with a presentation. I should see. Welcome Mr. George Stewart, Councilor George Stewart, who has joined us. Also, we have 3 items for our closed session later today. So we are going to stick to the allotted times, and we are going to try to make up a few minutes here and there so we can address those concerns tonight. So everyone's participation and assistance with that would be greatly appreciated. We will now have a presentation on the Parks and Recreation Department and potential budget requests, presented by Scott Henderson, the Director of our Parks and Rec Department, and this is scheduled for 30 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Council, for allowing us to present a pre-budget presentation of what to expect for the time. We got the outline from the Council, and as usual, Parks and Recreation complies to everything that the Council says for us to do. And to start out, the first thing, going over general plan, implementation, goals and objectives and accomplishments. I think you'll find in this next part of the presentation that how well Parks and Recreation is aligned with the Municipal Council and administration on our general plan. We've actually created a quick scrolling update that shows this alignment and shows our extensive progress working towards these goals. So because of how extensive and how great our accomplishments are, we actually are providing a little bit of music and scroll as we go through each slide quickly. We have provided you with a handout, so you will have plenty of time later to go over these goals in there, but keeping the Council's time in mind, we would not be able to go over each one of these individually. So let's go through these goals together.
rush of being home and rocket fading, failing to recall what I was missing, all that coming in you, ascending endlessly. On foot or by the help of transportation, to knock on windows where a friend no longer live, I have forgotten. Something to remind me of another place and time, where love that traveled far and found me. You stayed outside till 2, waiting for the light to come back. We didn't talk, I knew, until you asked what I was thinking. And puzzles, a woman holds her tongue, knowing silence will speak for her.
So as you see, that's a presentation unto itself, and we're excited about that type of connection that we have with the council and administration, that Parks and Recreation is a valued team member in moving this forward. We had a couple of areas to focus on, and we're really talking about sustainability in both ways. Joined here today by my administrative cohort in Parks and Recreation, Doug Robbins, and then most of our management team is also here. So the true great talent in Parks and Recreation are the people sitting in these chairs out here, and you know, it's something that we're really proud of, the accomplishments they have. So Doug's going to get up and is going to talk about environmental stewardship.
Scott?
You know, just as important as any fiscal sustainability that we need to focus on, we need to, within the Parks and Recreation Department, remember to have the long game in mind when it comes to environmental stewardship. We have some unique opportunities within the Parks and Recreation Department to really make a difference in the community. As Provo continues to grow in size and population density continues to increase, these parks and open spaces will truly become the breathing spaces for the community. Not everyone will be able to afford open space to enjoy, and these are common areas that we all share. And so these are some of the areas in which Parks and Recreation can really make a difference to the entire community. We appreciate the direction with the goals and objectives that the Municipal Council has given to us to keep us on track here. Some of our performance metrics for last year, over 3,000 tons of recycled grass clippings. 100% of all of our grass clippings are recycled here in Provo. That returns nitrogen in an organic form back to the turf grass. That saves us $6,000 in commercial grade fertilizers that we don't have to apply, and it also prevents runoff and other negative effects to overuse of commercial grade fertilizers. We recycle all of our motor oil, a tremendous amount of recycled batteries that we utilize throughout the entire department. We participate in community gardening throughout the community. We recycle metals, wood chips from our arboriculture program, and of course leaves that we collect in the fall.
Doug, can I ask you a question about that?
Yes.
The recycling, where is that done? Is that done out at the
Yep.
in East Bay?
It is. We partner with the local waste district, and then the material that we chip up and grind up ourselves from our operations, we often just utilize right back in our parks.
And in the past, Provo has, now we have quit doing the bio. So is that, how much fertilizer are you getting? Are you getting some good fertilizer even though we're not doing the bio anymore?
Sure. That's just returning these same nutrients right back into the places that they're retrieved from.
Okay.
It's really a good practice. Almost 4,000 trips due to a partnership that we have with Sundance Resort. We let them utilize our parking lot at Canyon Glen Park, at Canyon Glen, and their employees on the weekends drive up to the resort, and that saves that number of trips and the associated air pollution with those vehicle trips. Bicycle racks installed, and these kinds of sustainable practices are pretty common throughout all of our facilities. So we're excited to return to you in the future as we continue on in the next year as we develop our plan. These are the 5 different areas that we really focus on with regard to environmental sustainability. Grounds development, land use, that also includes buildings. Water quality and conservation, waste minimization, reuse and recycling, energy efficiency, conservation management, and transportation, fuel use, and air quality. And so we're really focused on those areas, and we're excited about the direction it's taking us. Thanks, Scott.
Let's talk about sustainability in a financial standpoint then. Both sides, as Doug said, are extremely important in a successful Parks and Recreation Department. We worked with council and administration last year, implemented the Triple Play program, which, first of all, the biggest, it gives our citizens an unheard of product value in being able to have access to the United States' most successful rec center, an Olympic ice skating venue, and our golf course in East Bay. 3 amazing facilities that we're very, very proud of, and now our citizens, as part of their Triple Play membership, get access. But it does provide us a chance to offset those general fund subsidies that those used to receive. And last year, that was $300,000 that helped the budget last year. We were able to return those subsidies. So that helps the city as a whole while delivering a great product to our citizens. Our citizens also supported the RAP tax. And as that goes, that's really a self-funding method for Parks and Recreation to fund some of the needed improvements at our parks and not having to come back to the general fund. Where we took a pay-as-you-go approach, and the first exciting project, which is starting this year, is our Provo River Trail improvements. But it is another example out of recognizing needs, which some people could say is an issue or a problem to be addressed, and then coming up with a solution towards those things that we need to cover. So another question asked by the council as part of the budget is goals and objectives which could be affected by funding or could benefit from additional funding. We have 2 examples here. At the Regional Sports Park on the left of the screen, that is really where we can talk about when do we want to start deriving the financial benefits and the economic impact benefits from this, and we'll work with the council both on this proposed project and what type of fast track that we would like to put this on to get those economic benefits of people coming to our community happening. Another great example of a project that benefited is this is the new Unlimited Play Center for those families that have children with different abilities in their household, and it's a place where everybody can play together, but it will be the most dynamic play center that Provo has ever seen, and quite frankly, that Utah has ever seen. We're excited about this, and this is going to start. But we have gone back to CDBG funding, I think, 3 times on this, because as we met with parents, they talked about we need more security around it in case they have a child that's a runner or doing those things. So we have had to come back more than a couple times. So, as council looks at it, council can add value through the budget process, and hopefully you look at expenditures in Parks and Recreation as a pretty good return on investment as you go through our projects with us. But those were a couple examples of how funding could possibly enhance a goal or objective that we have listed. So then you ask about what needs could be coming up. So here's a couple situations that are coming up here that you would think that Parks and Recreation would be coming back to this council. So let's talk about Bryce Merrill, who's here as the manager of the Recreation Center. So we're in a time of low unemployment, and So it's tougher and tougher to find staff. We have not given seasonal or part-time staff, had not given them a raise for 6 years since we opened. So it was becoming tighter and tighter. So as the in-tune administrator of this department, you would think that he is going to be coming this year and asking for those funds to be able to make those changes so we could be competitive, be able to hire, and be able to pay our staff in the market. Bryce, because he is a talented manager, has found a way through innovative staff scheduling, other cost savings, to be able to cover those wage adjustments within his existing appropriation, and Bryce solved that problem himself. So now our staff received a $2 per hour raise, and we are now able to compete in the market, and we're now able to have lifeguards watching our pools, which is kind of critical, and people manning our front desk and selling memberships, which are very critical also. He was able to solve that problem. So then I move on as an in-tune administrator, and I say, well, Parks definitely is going to need more money. We've added grounds responsibilities, we've added BRT responsibilities, we have bought the old KOA campground park site, added maintenance elements there. So I'm sure Parks is going to be becoming asked for and asked, but our talented manager, Larry Shane, who's down in as our park superintendent, who is here, he came up with ways to, and working with his supervisors, came up with ways to innovatively use our existing staff, look at cost savings within our existing appropriation, and he has found ways to cover those responsibilities with an ad. And I think I can come up with an example on about every single operation in our department, but this really does set the tone for how we approach problem solving and how we go about things within a city budget process. So I thought those were a couple great examples of innovative management and this overall city benefiting from that. Council asked about past supplemental requests and their impacts. So this past year, we were able to get an events position from seasonal to part-time regular. That was much appreciated, especially by our events team. We offer high impact events throughout our entire, and we are constantly in partnership with other departments throughout the city and with the mayor's office and even with council in different areas to conduct these events, and that really showed that, you know, that one team concept of where we were able to get that to part-time mayor, that made a huge difference for us to stay up with that impact. The AAA membership went through last year, and the outcomes of that are, as we discussed, will be 3 facilities that will be completely free from the general fund. And we've already gotten enough increase halfway through the year to be able to cover those subsidies, and then we're expecting to have an aggressive and successful end of the year, fiscal year here, to be able to hit our target to be able to cover all those needs that we have. So 2 things that happened in last budget year. One was much appreciated and one was revolutionary, and we did all that together between council administration and Parks and Recreation. So the council asked, what would we do in an economic downturn? I hope you see from the examples that we have given that we are there every single year in the budget process looking for ways that we can assist the city. So we went over this slide at the economic impacts of a well-run Parks and Recreation department, and obviously I'm kind of biased on our department, but this shows over $3 million of subsidy reduction in revenue generating facilities that Provo City enjoys every single year as part of their budget, showing our starting subsidy and where our subsidy is now. It's an amazing fact, and if you can find another story like that, I would love to hear it in government management. So as we would go through an economic downturn, we would have to go through this scenario together on budget cuts for self-sustaining budgets. So if we have areas that are covering their costs, do we still do budget cuts and impact our delivery to those citizens? Or do we look at other more targeted cuts with a corresponding target impact analysis. So we will know what we are cutting and what the impacts of that could be. The crazy thing is about during economic downturns, and we saw this during the last time that we went through our recession, is that's when people turn to our facilities and programs even more. There, you know, with an economic downturn, there's less spendable money for vacations out of town. That's when they stay closer to their community. So it's an interesting scenario that during downturns, how that is managed within Parks and Recreation. But I hope you realize you have a partner in Parks and Recreation in any adjustments that Provo City needs to make. An additional element of this, many of you have a historical perspective, and just look how Parks and Recreation has changed over the last 2 decades, 3 decades. And you know, going into a recreation center, adding the Peaks Ice Arena, adding the Covey Center, all those elements that we do. And our administrative team, we used to have 4 administrators in Parks and Recreation when we were a smaller department. Now we have 2 administrators, Doug and I, you know, for this whole process. So I hope you see a lean and mean, maybe not so mean, but at least a lean organization going through this. You know, that's a commitment. That's a commitment to high-level performance and working hard and getting things done. Some other budget discussions that we may have throughout the year next year, or even as part of this process, we will have the impact of construction at the golf course. So we'll not only be building the 3 mitigation holes to make way for the new medical school adjacent to the golf course, but we will also, we'll also have the medical school construction adjacent to the golf course. And most people do not golf to go to a construction site. They go to get away from those things. But you know, we've got Brett and Craig here from the golf course, and they are looking at innovative ways to try to make sure that our day-to-day users are impacted as little as possible, and they see the dynamics of running construction with that. We'll be talking about what time frame do we want to start deriving economic impacts, and if we want to go forward with the regional sports park. So that will be a discussion going forward. The rec center $500,000 contribution that goes back to the general fund. So we've got to keep an eye on market changes, because we were able to get the triple play membership through. We were able to find our way through market conditions where a new rec center in Springville did not impact our sales and our revenue. So we were ahead of that game. But Orem is talking about over $20 million improvements to their rec center. So we need to talk about the $500,000 contribution, and you know, is that going to be possible for the future, or what do we want to do with that in the possible future? So that kind of takes you through our department and some of the things and or trends that we'll be looking at as through this budget process. And we're now open for, we've got the whole troop here, so you guys can ask any question, and I've got someone here to answer it. Yes, George.
I'm curious about the recycling situation with internationally with China and all the problems that have been created in terms of the cost of recycling. Is that affecting your operations at all?
So internally, have you seen any impacts?
It really hasn't. A lot of our impacts are fairly local with, like I say, you know, debris that we're generating. We're just returning those back to these sites. We haven't really noticed any impact with some of these things that we're outsourcing, like batteries and metals. We've got Western Metals that's local. It's very easy transition for us to move that material there and return those dollars back to the budget too. So we haven't really noticed it at our scale right now.
So our internal and our partners in the city still seem to be viable at this point. So it still seems to be going from our transactional side.
So just a follow-up on that. That's a great question, but it's probably for Public Works or whoever's over the landfill operation itself, where, you know,
That's where it's being felt, probably. Right?
Yeah, all the stuff from the residential that perhaps doesn't have a market anymore, and then maybe just ends up in the landfill, and how practical is it anymore? Yeah.
Any other questions?
You just have to promise to ask Public Works a question about the next park development.
I'm getting a few questions with regard to the three events areas with the rec center, the ice pit, and the golf course, the ice arena and the golf course, and the separation of the financing. I know that we just want to be open with the public and say, this is what we're spending at the ice rink. And as we come back with more budgets, I would be interested in seeing a breakdown. I appreciate the work that you guys are doing. It's amazing the things that you've done there. And I just want the public to realize that we're not using one to feed the other, that we're doing so well in all three of those. We're doing well in all three of those areas, and I think it's important for them to the public to realize that. Could you get the breakdown of each area to us?
You bet. Yeah, I can show exactly what the rec center is paying for these expanded benefits for their members at these other two sites, and we can also give you the use statistics and everything about this quality partnership that our citizens benefit from. So we can quantify all that for you.
Thank you. This is just, there's so much going on over at Parks and Rec. It's amazing to me to be able to sit in on these meetings. One other thing that I think we need to message is the fact that this isn't the gym. People have often saying we're being compared with Gold's Gym and all these other little gyms. Well, yes, we are, but that's not the purpose of this place. When I start to look at the presentation and see everything that's going on, I think we forget that we're really not trying to compete with these other entities.
Hopefully we're a feeder. Hopefully with a healthy community, it feeds into these businesses, but you do not see the private sector jumping into senior programming, and you don't see them jumping into youth sports in a lot of ways. And so those are the things that we do as a city as part of this too, along with this fitness component. So you're right, it's a vast array compared to maybe a limited fitness scope.
And that's some of the concerns that I had heard in the past. Oh, you guys are making money like a gym. Well, that's not the purpose of this place.
Right.
And so I think that's a message that I would like to send, and we'll try to do that in the future.
We'll keep working on that too. Yeah.
So I view the rec center as like a community center, which I don't really view a gym as that. There's just so much more to the rec center. And help me if I'm wrong, but it's like if you get to be a really serious workout person, you may gravitate towards those other facilities.
Yeah, I think it serves as a feeder program towards that private sector. And when you talk about youth aquatics and teaching swimming lessons, and you go into the different areas of art classes, and I already brought up senior lunch and senior programming and everything that happens there. That's what makes it the community center, and I think you're spot on with your analysis. But the crazy thing is about our recreation center is, including in its financial package, it covers adaptive. It covers senior programming. All that is part of the costing model. So it is part of that array of programming, but it still is, a big part of the financial success and the youth success story of that facility also. So it's a really interesting story that a lot of people want to hear. So Cliff said, not everybody knows our management team. So we're going to start with Thomas McKenna. Real quick, stand up and your job title, and let's work around the room here.
Thomas McKenna, the Parks and Recreation Planning and Project Manager.
I'm Sean Wicker. I'm the Sports Field and Program Manager.
Kari Van Wagner, Executive Office Assistant.
Bryce Merrill, the Recreation Center Manager. Craig O'Farrell, Golf Course Superintendent.
Rob Watson, Golf Course Professional.
Austin Gonzalez, Eastside Superintendent.
Matt Bird Park Cemetery.
Larry Shane, Parks and Grounds Superintendent.
Travis Memo, Parks Maintenance Area Supervisor.
And we've already met Doug. So to finish out, if you don't mind, we did our own top 10 list. Top 10 reasons why Parks and Recreation is supported by its citizens. We had enough problems with our audio on the first music part on the setup, so no drum roll here. Number 10, don't mess with my fun time. 2 times Parks and Recreation has gone to election, and 2 times it has passed at 60%. People take this serious. You can mess with a lot of things, but don't mess with people's own time. Number 9, Provo Parks turf looks better than most yards. That may be bragging a little bit, but we really put forth some high-quality park environments in Provo. Number 8, Provo Parks and Recreation will watch my kids while I play. It's pretty amazing. We run a child watch that has how many visitors in a year, Bryce?
Just over 50,000.
Pretty amazing what we're providing to be able to keep our adults active and happy in our community. Number 7, big families, big functions, big pavilions. We know our community. We know what you need to build here, and some of our big family reunions are more than accommodated at our beautiful parks. Number 6, from Start Smart to Olympic Gold. We start kids on our miniaturized fields, Field of Dreams, which is located with the rec center, and we operate a place where athletes can win Olympic gold and have won Olympic gold at an ice arena. Where else are you going to find that anywhere else in the industry? Sustainably amazing. We went over that together. Absolutely financially and in the look at our impact on the environment. Absolutely amazing. Number 4, I skipped because I got impatient and pushed the button twice. 600 of your biggest party animals work in this department. And most of the time when a holiday is celebrated in Provo, a lot of our citizens are celebrating it with us. You know, things are happening on July 24th, New Year's Eve, those type of things. So can you imagine if these numbers that we're seeing at all of our facilities, if our citizens didn't have those places to spend their free time, what would they find time to do? And I think it would have a negative impact on our city. From arts to Zumba, I can't imagine a more diverse Parks and Recreation department, including art centers and cemetery. Another way to say it is we take you cradle to grave, because we have a cemetery. So we are everywhere in this facility, in this community, and it's pretty amazing the diversity of our program. Number 2, have you gone and compared us to any other Parks and Recreation department in the nation? I think you will come back to Provo even more satisfied when you look at all the different characteristics of how much we're being utilized, our financial health, and what we deliver for our community. And the number 1 reason why Parks and Recreation is supported by your citizens is we should have called the triple play membership, I did all of this for only how much membership. It's pretty amazing what we delivered to our citizens as part of this process that had a side benefit for the Provo City as a government organization too. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Looks like you nailed it. We're right on the dot. 30 minutes late. Right. Keeping up the time. Appreciate that. We will now move to item number 2, a discussion regarding the Provo City 5-year capital improvement plan for fiscal year 2019-2020. This will be presented by Mr. Justin Graybaugh, our city budget officer. And this is budgeted for 60 minutes. If we can trim a few off that, we'll have our appreciation.
Yeah, we can go through it as quickly as you'd like. So I think Dave Decker will be joining us shortly. Yeah, it was a little full in here, but we're going to be going through, we're going to go over this in 2 sessions. During this first session, we plan to go over just the Public Works portion of this document. And so we'll be going through, we'll start on page 4, Hannah, when we go through this document. Actually, maybe we want to start close to the beginning, but we've made a number of changes over the past few years, and this is, I think, the first year we haven't made substantial changes to the document compared to previous versions. It includes operational budget impacts and prioritization scoring so that we can communicate to you how an item is funded, how important we think it is, and what the impact to the operating budget will be. Are there any questions on how we communicated those to you, or concerns about how we've scored any of these things or the process that we've used? So if not, we can dive right into the projects and get rolling. So as soon as this comes up, we'll start on page 4 with the airport. Now, this document does not include substantial changes to any of the CIPs to reflect the changes that might take place given the terminal development. When we first put this together, we weren't confident about whether or not we would secure the state and county funding for it. And so this airport is across 2 sections. The funded portion, which includes only just this terminal concept design, and then the next page has the unfunded portion, which now is largely funded.
Before you get too far away from that, I want to thank the mayor, and Isaac especially, for the things that happened at the airport. That was an amazing thing. That is such a great thing for our city, county, and state. Thank you so much for all you did on that.
It's a pleasure. It's going to have a huge impact, and part of that is why it's not incorporated in here is we're still trying to figure out exactly all the questions that need to be answered through the process of the design and development of this, and what exactly will be the impact to the other CIPs as we shift prioritization.
I'll say this was required to be delivered to the council on March 1st, so this is kind of as of what we knew when we delivered to the council.
Yeah, so this document is typically not a living document, so we as we make changes to it, we'll strive to inform you on how we're making changes to it, particularly as we do the 2020 budgeting process. We'll be able to communicate better to you how any of these CIPs have changed from this version to that one as we appropriate the 2020 budget. These numbers are preliminary numbers that reflect only some of the direct costs, but again, those are things that we'll be revisiting over these next few months and years as we go through the development process for the terminal. If there are not any other questions, we can move on to engineering on page 33. So engineering is where we fund, this is kind of a catch-all for a lot of the roads and other infrastructure that the city constructs. And so one of the big ones that you'll notice here is this new Provo River Bridge. This is a portion of the Lakeview Parkway connection that will go over the Provo River to connect to the north part of that transportation network that's included. Maybe it's on B and C, but there are some Lakeview Parkway. Here's some of the phase 4. So there's basically 3 sections of Lakeview Park that will be constructed. And I believe, Dave, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the very northern end that will be constructed first, and then the middle section connecting the 2 will come later as we navigate some of the intricacies of the Provo River Delta project and items like that. Let's see, the Nevada Path Avenue project, this is just a preliminary start on making some upgrades to that section of road. But again, I'd be happy to answer.
Well, the road had to be closed when we were doing that bridge. It's kind of hard to cross the river.
The Provo River, so I believe, Dave, the road, this will extend to a new section of road, and I imagine it might have some impact on the area immediately around the bridge, but I don't imagine it will have any impact on the traffic.
So the bridge that we're talking about is on the Lakeview Parkway itself. So the Lakeview Parkway sits a little bit further west from the Lakeshore Drive. It's out there. So the bridge construction will actually not impact the existing roads. We don't anticipate any closures, construction related, but as far as a permanent impact, I don't see anything.
Are there any other questions on any of these projects that Dave or Jimmy can answer for you? The next one that we're going through is on page 72. It's on B and C. And this is, again, this is where we get funding from the state for projects on B and C class roads, and a lot of this is kind of business as usual, and there's not any major, I think, changes from previous years.
I do have a question about some of these things here, because we do have some changes with regard to the transportation utility fee, I understand, coming forward. Is that because you're not seeing any changes because we still have one more year left on that?
So the B and C funds are a separate funding source from the new tax that the county approved. So the county approved a portion of sales tax that will be used for transportation related expenses. Those aren't restricted to B and C roads. And so those are going to be part of the equation of how we solve some of our other transportation needs. Now, how that affects the UTF is part of the UTF's adoption was including that we would reevaluate or publicly address its continued existence and evaluate it in the event of receiving those revenues, but a year after we had collected them, so that we knew how much we were going to get. Because we know what we think we're going to get from the sales tax, but having the actual data will help us make the decision on if we do want to make changes to the UTF, what would be those appropriate changes. Does that answer your question?
Kind of, but I think that we're already set. We know we're going to have to make some changes because some people are not going to participate, I understand.
I don't know if this is probably something better for the mayor to weigh in on some of the particular issues with some of the entities, but largely I think the plan is for the UTF to remain intact as it is for now, and that if we do change it, it would be at a future date.
So do those projections that we see here today include basically the same?
The assumption that it's business as usual.
Business as usual on that.
Yes. And I think we have reason to believe that that's a likely scenario. But I don't know, Dave, if you have anything you want to add to that, or okay. Are there other, Dave? Connect.
Well, it probably isn't for this page. There's a separate page. I don't know if you were going to cover it, where we used to have a project on the books for Second West and a bridge for $20 million, but that's kind of changed into a study, I believe, to determine if the bridge is better there or Fifth West or what we should do.
Yeah, so that is on the last one. It was on engineering. So if you want to go back, Hannah, to page 33, I believe is it one of the unfunded projects? So it might be the page, it might be 34, or no, it's on here. The number 10, this one. So I think you can address this if you want, Dave, on the need for this and kind of assessing where the right place is, and if we did do it, we would necessarily, I think, involve MAG and other funding sources as an option there. But I think we just maybe don't know enough yet to be able to say how much and when and where we're going to spend that money on.
Listen, my understanding is that funding is actually through MAG. We made a request for that study to be done, and so they're looking at a number of roads for an additional bridge, even if there is a bridge needed. So we're not committing to a specific location. They're just evaluating whether another bridge is needed in that area.
As part of the evaluation, will they also consider the need for perhaps a footbridge, pedestrian bridge, for example, even the 7th, I think it is 7th West, where the school is crossed. So there's really two different things, the vehicular and then the pedestrian.
I don't know for sure. I can ask Dave Graves if pedestrian, but I would anticipate if we're going to build another structure over the railroad tracks, we would accommodate pedestrians at a minimum on that structure itself.
Right, but if they choose not to do a vehicular bridge, at the least maybe we need to do another pedestrian in addition to the one that's going down by the front.
We can follow up with MAG and make sure that that's evaluated.
Other questions?
I have a road question, but I don't know if it fits under engineering or if it's under B&C or if it's under another one.
Yeah, we can address it now.
Okay. this is a great document, and I point a lot of people to it. If they have questions like, what is the city up to? It's like, it's all here. I mean, there's so much information. And it's nice browsing through it. I feel like when questions come up, like, oh, what about this project? I can say, well, you know, this is kind of where it's at. And so it's very helpful. One thing that I didn't see in here is 820 North. You know, we did a study on that. It kind of laid out, you know, what was going to happen at some point, but I don't see any money being set aside for it. It's not listed on here, and some people say have informed me that you know, when they ask about it, I'm like, well, you know, I think the study's been done, but you know, nothing's going on right now, and then I'm told that, you know, the city's acquiring properties as they come up, and so I guess just wondering where it's at and why we don't see it.
Dave can probably address it, but I think the intention is that the timeline probably extends beyond this time horizon here is probably the largest reason, but Dave, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
So right now, UDOT is heading up that project, and that's largely why it's not showing up on our funding sources, is because it's largely considered a UDOT process, and they are moving forward. We meet on a fairly regular basis with the mayor and UDOT representatives. They are moving forward with the process, and I anticipate, you know, in the next year or two that we'll start to see a lot of activity, you know, from an environmental standpoint, not construction, but just, you know, continuing to follow the UDOT process for that project. But it's a lengthy process. It's not going to happen in a quick timeline.
Dave, can I ask you a follow-up question? With that, would that be a UDOT road, kind of? And I know that Orem is working on the 1600 trying to get UDOT to take that. Is that something that Provo would consider, or UDOT doesn't want anything to do with that, or is that something that we would be looking at?
That particular question hasn't come up in the conversation of, you know, the road 820 North itself. It's mostly been about, you know, potential changes to the road, and again, it's mostly because of I-15, you know, the proximity there. The reason that UDOT's leading the project on that. I don't know where UDOT would stand as far as taking 820. And I'm not sure that the city necessarily would want that either.
I don't know either, but I just think of what's happening up on 1600 in Orem and why UDOT is now taking charge in the maintenance of that.
Yeah, we haven't raised that question yet with UDOT.
So when we purchase properties, is that being done with UDOT money? Is that being done with city money? What pot is it coming in?
So generally, we have been going to MAG, and they have a corridor preservation fund, and I think we've done it 3 times, I think, along 820, and we have, you know, people that are willing sellers. There's a certain set of rules that MAG has, you know, that MAG follows, and when we meet those regulations, we can go to them and make a specific request for, you know, a specific property. And we've done that, like I said, I think 3 or 4 times now.
Thank you. Very helpful.
Yes.
Well, we're on 820. There's been a request made a number of times over the last 2 or 3 years to make crossing over the railroad tracks safer. Kids riding bikes and walking. Where they cross the tracks, there's no sidewalk, there's no curb, there's no protection. So kids are walking over tracks, trying to stay out of the way of cars, and I talked to Dave Graves about it a couple of times. Is there any, I don't see any funding to do any improvement there, and is there any hope of getting that taken care of?
We've done a couple of minor things. I know I'm familiar with some of the requests, and there's been a couple of minor things, but you're right, we don't have anything specific on the list, and we could probably do, again, something relatively minor in that area, but I think there's some hesitancy without knowing what's going to happen long-term with that road to do something significant, you know, with a significant expense that may get taken out in a few years.
And I appreciate that, although if a young child gets killed,
you're right.
There's going to be a lot more concern than you're right. So I think we need to balance something there that not significant, but can we make it somewhat safer so those kids especially the high school's down there now, so the movement's in that direction, and it'll just be helpful.
I'm happy to have, we can look at it again.
Thank you.
As I went past there today, there was some construction equipment there. They seem to be focusing more on the western crossing. There's kind of the two sets of trail crossings.
There's front runner and there's...
And I think the eastern one's more of the problem, but I don't know if that's related to anything, but there was some equipment down there working on the shoulder there, and I was hopeful as well that we might get a better pedestrian crossing there.
With all the help we received at the airport, maybe we ought to talk with the railroad and see what they're like, if there's any opportunities there also.
I can certainly ask. The railroad seems to be less willing.
That's a hard.
I know it's hard, but darn it.
We can look again. I know there are some concerns that remain there, and it's a little bit more difficult because those two railroad crossings are separated just a little bit of an odd distance, so it makes it there's some unique challenges there.
Yeah.
So if we're all right with roads, we'll move on to sanitation. Now on page 90. Page 90 has only a few things. Sanitation. So one of the projects is a public works facilities improvements. Now these are projects that are spread across the different funds, and there are actually 4 of these projects, one in each of the 4 utilities. These are projects that are identified in their master plan for improvements to facilities located at their current headquarters that would basically help bring many of those aging facilities up to where they need to be and plan to be in the future. Are there any questions on that specific project? So it is spread across the 4 utility funds every year for each of these 5 years.
Is the facility adequate, or does it need to be replaced someday?
So we actually have a master plan for the entire public works facility, so it's not just a specific facility. So one of the items that fell under this project was the fleet building that was completed a couple of years ago. The office remodel is being currently done. The next significant project that we've identified in the master plan is actually a rehabilitation of the fueling island. So all city vehicles have access to that fueling island, and there's discussion about whether natural gas should be incorporated into that design. And I don't want to go too far down this road, but there is some conversation. If it goes natural gas, do we make it available to the public at that point? And that could depend on if we can get an outside funding source, through the state funding. But that's the next significant project on the public works list.
So I have a question. They're coming out with a new lower emissions fuel. And so how does that low emission gasoline compare in output of emissions to natural gas?
I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to check with Nancy, being our fleet manager. She may have some information on that.
So I used to think we were really missing the boat with cheap natural gas, which is so plentiful and it's so low on the emission scale. But maybe that's changing a little bit as we go into tier 3 gas.
I can find out if Nancy has anything on that.
For Dave, another thing, I'm grateful for the bonding that we've been able to accomplish. Do you see any bonds in the future? And if you do not, do you feel that the reserves that you're putting away, which we're just kind of starting to do a few years ago, putting away are going to meet our capital needs, or what are the bonding things that you see coming up?
I don't see bond needs. We've been pretty careful from a financial standpoint in planning for projects, and obviously with the rate increases that we have recommended, it's allowed us to put some money away. The water fund, we haven't gotten to it yet, but the water fund is probably the most evident, where there's several what I'll call savings accounts being that are set up, and they're starting to have some good revenue, so that when water tanks or large pipelines have to be installed, there's funds available. So but we don't have to go and bond.
And with that being said, how flexible are those accounts? Should a council decide, well, we maybe want to do it over someplace else? Are those pretty solid?
I think that's a better question for finance or the administration to, you know, how I don't know.
I would say very solid. I mean, we don't plan on pulling money from one fund to another fund. Those funds are set aside for these projects that are a priority, that have been determined by master planning and whatnot, so we're committed to it.
And I love that attitude, because those are kind of commitments that we make to the community as we charge them. And this is what we're going to do with this, rather than have it take off on a whim. Thank you, I appreciate that.
And largely the precedent we've been very consistent with is if we did borrow something, it would be on a term of an inter-fund loan. For instance, that was proposed from Energy, where Energy's not actually sacrificing their ability to do the projects they need to do, but if they did have excess, they would loan that money and return a dividend based on that loan. Does that?
It does make sense, but I've also seen that loan be forgiven sometimes.
Yeah,
so I have,
but for many years that's not been the case.
And you're right, and that's what I appreciate. I'm grateful for that. Thank you.
So the next on page 92 is the stormwater fund. Many of these projects are, again, kind of very similar to the types of things that they've been doing in the past, and may have impacted some of the communities that you represent, but they aren't that different from what they have been doing in previous years. Any questions on this? Sorry, we'll get to the interesting one soon. The UTF is on page 107. This is, again, kind of a business as usual, assuming that we've collected a consistent amount, which it has been consistent, of this about $2.3 million that we've collected and used. I think we're doing some heavy spending in this current fiscal year of these funds, doing some significant improvements to our roads, but these are earmarked specifically for maintaining existing roads.
Is this the last year for the UTF? Before we have to decide as a council?
It is because of the new funding source that the county has provided that we have to have a public meeting. It doesn't, from my understanding, and John maybe can correct me, but the requirement is that we hold a public hearing addressing it, not necessarily that we remove, repeal, or even significantly change it. But we have that opportunity to evaluate whether or not we're adequately funding our road maintenance. And that'll be a question that I think we'll probably need to, by ordinance, we'll need to visit by the end of next year.
And I appreciate it, because I think what we did when we set this up was that we were going to do it on a five-year basis. And then, like you said, we were going to evaluate any new funds that came in. But I just really believe in this fund. And I'd hate to, I just want to make sure that we have the opportunity to talk about its pros as we bring it forward again.
Just as I drive around, and I do quite a bit to do my job, I would say that we're in need of more funds because of all the potholes I have to drive around. I don't think we're ahead of the game, and as we get a new funding source, we need to carefully evaluate what our real needs are and if we're keeping up.
And I also look at the 5-year plan that we've done over the last 5 years. We have done more roads, more than we have ever done in the history of Provo. Maybe there are more roads, but we have really done a remarkable job, I think, in keeping up our roads over the last 5 years especially.
It's gotten better for sure, but it's such a huge problem.
It's almost like you always are you're more and more behind, no matter how much you do.
We're getting ahead. I see us getting ahead, catching up, and that was part of the problem. We didn't have those funds. We were falling behind all the time. And with the UTF, we were able to put a plan in place where we were able to crawl ahead and start to catch up on some of those things. And they had a great plan of, we're going to do the salvageable roads first, kill the ones that are dead anyway, and then bring it back.
We actually have the same group that did the study 5 years ago coming back this May. They'll do about an analysis that will take about 2 months, And so midsummer, we'll probably have a report back from them, and they'll be able to compare where we were at 5 years ago and, to today. I think we'll show progress. It definitely has been an improvement, and the UTF has largely been the funding source for it. Where we sit as far as future projects, I'm not sure that I can predict right now, but I think we will show improvement in the roads.
Question? Go ahead, Mr. Stewart.
Yes.
I'm not familiar with Salt Lake County or Weaver County, but our roads are better than any other city in Utah County, in my mind. I drive somewhere around the county, and maybe we're not where we'd like to be, but I think we're better than anyone else by a long ways. And I think the utility transportation fund has been part of the reason for that.
If there are no other specific questions on this, we can move on to the vehicle bank, page 110. Right now we're nearing, as you can see, the end of a 5-year plan that was a process of improving the quality of our fleet. They're currently in the process of extending that 5-year plan out into these additional horizons, but this $2 million isn't actually going to be spent on just non-departmental vehicles. It just hasn't yet been programmed. It involves weighing the needs of all the departments within the city and identifying the most prudent use of those resources to sustainably build our fleet in a way that we're being responsible and proactive about making sure we're not getting behind on maintenance and unnecessary expenses related to not replacing our equipment. So the next one, wastewater, page 111. Wastewater has a number of projects that we could probably spend a whole hour discussing some of these items, but you're already well aware of many of them. We'd be happy to address any specific concerns you have about it, but I believe, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're planning on spending money in the upcoming fiscal year to begin on the process of establishing a new wastewater treatment plant.
That's correct.
And you can see that there's going to be some significant investment over the next few years related to that. A lot of that coming through these water quality bonds. That'll be those low interest items.
So the big ticket item is the new wastewater plant. The next biggest one I see is West Side sewer lines. And how much for the West Side sewer lines would you say are required just because of growth?
I think it's something Dave's team will have to answer.
My presentation at the end of the work session may help to answer this question a little bit better, but just to answer your question in a general fashion, there is a large percentage that's related to growth. Just from the impact fee study that was done a few months ago, you could go item by item, project by project through that study, and generally it was pretty high percentage of the projects were related to growth. Not all of them, obviously, but certainly a good percentage of it.
One more question. Yeah. Do you see a lot of change in this particular thing because of the airport terminal that we would like to build? Is it going to substantially change this one around also, as far as the west side and the needs there, or are we? I don't know. How is that going to affect this?
So again, the presentation at the end of the work session will probably help explain this a little bit better, because we have a map that shows year by year how those projects kind of lay out on the west side, and you'll see that right now we haven't identified a funding source, and we'll have to switch some projects around due to the airport. And we knew this going into it that it was potential funding for the airport came through. So we are going to have some conversation about flip-flopping some of those projects around.
And have you already got some of those projects in mind, I guess?
We do, and you'll see on a map at the end of the work session, you'll see the maps, or the projects that are identified And we may have to, like I said, we may have to change the priority of some of those projects.
Are there any other questions on items related to this wastewater? Again, we'll have a presentation later today that will address some of that. The water fund is our final public works on page 131. There's a few items in here that are new. One of them being this emergency backup power. This is a project intended to improve our ability to respond to extreme circumstances, and actually will benefit, I think, a number of areas across public works, not just the water, but I think improves our ability to respond to emergencies. Some of these other projects down here, this mill race and aquifer storage projects are new projects compared to previous CIPs, and I think we could answer specific questions about those or other projects that you see on here.
So where are we really lacking the most on the backup power?
So my understanding is that this would fund basically a generator that could be mobile, that we could place onto a truck and then bring to an area if we were to lose power, for instance, at a particular pump or some other facility. We could bring that generator and be able to power those pieces of equipment on an as-needed basis.
So each one of our pump houses doesn't have a backup?
Dave is probably better addressed.
No, we did an evaluation earlier this year, and I was surprised by the number of pump stations, particularly in water, that do not have backup power. So that's why we focused in water. Our wastewater system does have most of the lift stations do have emergency power, but I was concerned about water particularly, and that's why it's showing up in this fund.
I got one more question about road. Go back to roads for a second. I'm glad Scott and the Parks and Rec Department are here right now. We have on Center Street I've had people ask me, what about walking around Center? Is there any projects that can address people? I know it's supposed to be a walking park. What do we call it? A
linear park.
A linear park. And I wonder, is the maintenance of that in Parks and Rec? Is it in the roads department as far as upkeep of that? And we do have a problem with walking from the middle of the street out, and I see all our plants that you guys planted last year have been trampled during the winter time. I don't know whether they're going to come back. It becomes a challenge for people walking across Center Street. I know it's small compared to some of these things we're talking about, but I promised someone I'd ask.
It's okay. As far as the maintenance of the road, you know, the curb gutter, asphalt, the sidewalks, that falls in the Public Works Department. So as far as replacement, you know, asphalt changes, crosswalks, things like that, that's work that Public Works has been doing, and we've shown some improvement, but I think the challenge will remain as long as we park cars in the middle of Center Street. We'll continue to have some challenges for you know, the linear fashion of Center Street.
I don't know if that's a discussion. I don't know how to handle that one exactly. So,
I think in years past we have attempted to address Center Street redesigns, but they're complicated and expensive.
They are.
It's all about priorities.
It is, and I appreciate that. I just told someone I would bring that out.
I do believe that Parks does do the maintenance of the actual planter boxes and some of the other items there, and they might be able to answer any specific questions you have about that. If not, that's the end of the Public Works. Yes, Councilmember Harding.
So I had a quick question on, I think it was 131, that new project about the aquifer storage. I think we have an outstanding request just for a little more information to help us understand aquifer storage. It's number 23, 123. Particularly in comparison, because that's something we can do after we've treated our water, rather than just putting it out into the lake, putting it into the aquifer storage. And a potential other use of that would be of the effluent would be to water as agricultural water. And so anyway, it just reminded me that we still have that outstanding request for a little more information on that.
Dave, I don't know if you want to.
We're actually planning to take some significant time in April and talk about ASR. It is a significant add to the water CIP. And I have to tell you, the funding sources that are identified right there probably will change as we get the study back. We have engaged an engineering firm to do a 3-phase study of aquifer storage, and we're hoping to get the first phase completed sometime this summer. It will, it's needed pretty dramatically. But the main focus of ASR is looking at the long-term health of the aquifer. So underneath the city, and this goes for most cities along the Wasatch Front, we have wells that take water out of the ground, and we're looking at the long-term sustainability of that aquifer. So the natural process of putting water into the aquifer is snow melt from the mountains. It goes into the aquifer. It's anywhere from, we draw water from about 250 to 700 feet down below the surface. And we're looking at the trends of that aquifer. Obviously, in good water years, similar to what we have now, the aquifer tends to go up because of the recharge, the natural recharge from the mountains. In long-term droughts, it tends to drop. But overall, our sense right now is the aquifer is on the decline. Looking back at data going clear back into the 70s, and we're just looking at how what sources of water Provo potentially has to artificially recharge the aquifer. And it would largely require pumping water from a variety of different sources, potentially the effluent from the treatment plant, as you mentioned, into the foothills and into the lower part of the mountains, so that we can artificially recharge the aquifer. So that's the Reader's Digest version of that project. And it's important. Provo City has significant water rights for groundwater. We have 16 wells that we run right now, and but water rights are only good if the water is available in the source, and so we have to protect that source.
Thank you.
Okay, did you?
On that first line mentioning wells, they don't have specific details on which wells. I understand the South Park presentation the other night at neighborhood meeting, the new well over there by the neighborhood 1460 in the park. Is that going to be this year? That's not part of this.
So there's a number of wells. You're right. I mean, there's a number of wells identified. We spent about $1 million. So right now, the wells that we are focused on, there is a well in the Grandview area. It's next to West Ridge Elementary School, close to the tennis courts. That's one of 3 wells that we're looking at. We're re-drilling the 4800 North well. That's an existing well close to the Neaters up on 4800 North. That's underway right now. And then there's a new well planned at the just immediately west of the new tank in Grandview as well. So we have three wells. 4800 is the first one. The Grandview on next to the new tank is the second one from a priority standpoint, and then over at West Ridge Elementary would be the third one.
Any timeline?
So we're hoping to start the one next to the tank this spring, and hopefully our funding sources will allow us to drill the well sometime next year at West Ridge.
Thank you.
So anticipate fall would be the earliest, probably spring of next year would be the more likely scenario.
Any other questions or concerns? If you do have further questions on items like this, please feel free to reach out to me or to Dave, and we'd be happy to address any concerns from your constituents or items included. If the council wants, we can look at a few additional ones, preempting next week, or if you'd like to take the extra 20 minutes or so for this work session, whatever your preference.
Mr. Stratton, walk in, or Bryce or whoever. The question is do we want to end this item now and give us more time for the closed meeting, or do we want to pull some of these pages from 2 weeks from now and so we'll lighten it up? I guess my question is,
I suspect we might have plenty of time next time as well, but it just depends on what the other items are.
So we have, he's finishing short, is what you're telling me?
Yes.
use the time for other things later.
Okay, so yeah. Thank you for.
I would like to bring up one topic, if it's all right. I appreciate this presentation here very much. One thing that would be interesting to me, this is our budget, especially when we get in with the individual departments, is, and I don't know if this is something that I need to have Cliff do or Scott or the department heads, is to look at the estimated for each department for what we're looking at for the future budget, and then bringing in what we spent on last year's budget, just to compare the two as we go through this as a council. If this is a budget process that we're doing now, I'd be interested in comparing last year's versus the projected budget and see if there's
by project. So
well, this is different probably with by project. It's hard because this is just bringing in what we're doing in the future. But as if that discussion was ended, I'd like, as we start to bring in the departments, I would like to see from Parks and Rec where we were last year, what we spent our money on, and then a projected budget. If this was your budget presentation, I would like to have a few more numbers involved. I love the concepts and the ideas, the presentation that you gave us, and I would like to see some numbers even for future departments as they come in.
When we put together the 2020 budget document, we'll include actual expenditures for the 2018 fiscal year. Obviously, we're in the current 2019, so we'll have the adjusted budget for the current year, but we can address it through that process or through this process. I think whatever the council's preference is.
I just know that the department heads are now starting to come in, and I would like to just have a snapshot on last year versus a snapshot on this year.
Yep, we can. So Mr. Winfrey, we'll address that tomorrow in leadership and see. Talk to me afterwards. Help me understand a little bit more what you're asking.
Okay.
And then
we're going to be gone.
We're going to be gone.
Talk
to me and help me understand what you're asking, and then we'll work with the administration, see how we can.
Well, in the past, you've been so great. The last year was awesome. When all right, this is what the police had. This is what they're doing, and you can see how they've had to shift and make funds, and some places jumped, some places dropped. And I would like to know as a council member why we increased and why we dropped.
Sure. We can do our best to address that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Item 3 on the agenda is a presentation from the administration about proposed organizational changes. We will look to our mayor and Mr. Parker for this presentation, and it is budgeted for 30 minutes.
Okay, so we looked into this and made the announcement at the state of the city, and I have tasked Wayne with really diving deep because he has the institutional knowledge, and bless his heart, I think I've worked him out. I know I've worn his wife out. She's homesick.
She is.
So
I'll probably be excused after we get done here. We're going to make a trip to the doctor's office. So.
Yes, so I'll turn the time over to Wayne and let him do his piece, and if he needs to step up, I'm here to take and answer any questions you might have.
I'm good for that part too. So, well, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here and talk to you about our process as we've been through the last several months, and describing what our set of recommendations is, and then we'll talk a little bit about where we go from here. So let me begin by talking about the need, first of all. I've discovered this as I've watched a number of mayoral transitions, that when a brand new mayor comes into office, there is a long line of people out the door waiting to air concerns and grievances and worries about what's happened in past administrations. And this one's been no exception. The mayor has had lots of these meetings with people from the development community, from the bike walk community, from very diverse group of folks who have told us that our system is not functioning well, our development approval system. And that's ranged from it's too hard to develop in Provo to it's not hard enough to develop in Provo, depending on who you talk to. We should put up more barriers because we need to protect neighborhoods, and we should take down barriers so that we can encourage quality growth in the community. So we've kind of heard it all. Additionally, in addition to that, as you know, Councilmember Sewell chaired a working group, a council subcommittee on development approval process, review and spent the better part of 2 years interviewing all different stakeholders and tried to identify a number of problems that could be resolved. And some of those we have, some of those are being addressed by this proposal. And again, particularly in the last year, we've been really reaching out to the development community and asking their view of their experience in working with the city staff and the council and neighborhoods through the development review process. And so we identified a need to make some changes in how we do things and how we're structured around this particular process. So in part, the timing's motivated, number one, by this series of loud voices that we've been hearing with these concerns. Additionally, as we're planning for the new city center, and I think Mayor Kafusi nailed it right on the head when she said we hate to build a city center that would constrain our ability to be optimally organized. We shouldn't put people in disparate places that need to talk to each other. And so we kind of began on this embarked effort to try to figure out who should, starting ostensibly about who should be sitting together, who should be in the same place. And the further we went with this, the more apparent it became that there were a number of solutions to the problem. No one solution got us everywhere where we needed to go. So we talked again with stakeholders. We've been through a several-month process with our department director team to talk about restructuring opportunities. And then I said careful and thoughtful review, and I can tell you we've spent dozens of hours on our staff trying to evaluate various choices and alternatives. I'll highlight later in the presentation that this was not a consensus decision. This was an executive decision to bring this to you. Not everyone's in alignment with this proposal, but I think at the end of the day it is the, as I'll highlight at the very end, the right next step for us to take. So I want to give you two paradigms or lenses that we looked at this problem through. One was what we've been calling balancing tests, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So I put this illustration, it's not the best one I could find, because when we're thinking about a balancing test, for us it's really more, as opposed to a rock with two rocks on either side, it's more like a disc with rocks all around it in various sizes and shapes, and the moment you move a rock one way or another, it has a tendency to upset the balance. And so part of what our concern has been here is to maintain balance. It's to ensure that the varying competing interests are addressed and thought carefully about. So for example, we've looked at balancing the ease of the development process versus ensuring high quality development. We can streamline things and make them go really fast, but at the end of the day, we might not have a very good quality development. We might have substandard roads or other challenges. We've looked at flexibility for applicants versus rigid standards that protect our infrastructure. That's been a significant issue. We understand that our residents have hundreds of millions of dollars of investment in infrastructure, and we don't want to create a circumstance where we're taking care of a development's infrastructure, but we create problems downstream or upstream, for example, in the case of energy. We've talked about accelerated approval processes versus protections for neighborhoods. We can streamline things, we can make things go a lot faster, but do we give the appearance, if not the reality, of kind of rolling over neighborhoods and residents who have concerns about development? So those were some of the balancing tests. The second lens we looked through, and again, it's more complicated than this, but the easiest way for me to characterize it, I don't know how many of you have read Good to Great, Jim Collins' kind of landmark work on how leaders and organizations should operate. And there are lots of concepts in Good to Great, like the hedgehog concept and all these things. But one of the analogies that Jim Collins points up is what he kind of calls the parable of the bus. And that is, an organization is like a bus in that the rows and seats are laid out in certain ways. And his point was, you define who, then what. And so you put the right people on the bus, first of all. You get them in the, you organize the bus in the right way, you get the right people on the bus, you put the right people in the right seats on the bus, and then you excuse the wrong people from the bus. And that's sort of the model. And so as we thought about this in different ways to draw the organization chart we tried to think about it this way. Do we have the right people in the right places? Do we have the organization right? And are the right people on our bus with us, and are they sitting in the right chairs? And so we tried to think through all of those kinds of issues as we went into this. So again, right people in the right seats on the bus, wrong people off the bus. And so between the balancing tests and the good to great bus parable, those were that's sort of the way we thought about this. So I wanted to at least characterize it. So as you look at some of the changes we're proposing, they fall into context. So our changes center around 3 different broad areas. So one is structure, and there are a number of sort of smaller nuances, but the major changes are to recommend the creation of a new department called Development Services, and then to rename and reformat Community Development. And so we'll talk about kind of how we went about the split and what changes we're proposing. So structure is one, location is second, which is creating the idea of a one-stop shop for development approval. And so we would physically co-locate, regardless of who people report to in the organization, we would physically co-locate all individuals who are involved in the development review process. So the one-stop shop, for example, would locate, as we'll see in a minute, 2 or 3 people out of Public Works who would leave the Public Works headquarters out in East Bay and would now office in the one-stop shop. Same thing with a fire marshal. We'd move one of the fire prevention staff into that area. So when a developer comes to meet with us and talk about development review, everybody who's got a role to play is sitting at the table and can help move that process forward in a meaningful way. And then third is process, and we've called this reformatting the CRC, or the Coordinators Review Council. It's a little more than that, but that's the predominant movement. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And the combination of those 3 things, we believe, will address the concerns that we've been hearing for the last several months and years. So let's talk about the 2 new departments, one reformatted and one brand new. So Development Services, first of all, we would bring Economic Development and the Redevelopment Agency, both of whom report now directly to the Mayor's office. We would put them underneath the umbrella of Development Services. We would bring current planning, so 3 planners, two full-time planners in Brian Maxfield. We would move into the new department, and they would be responsible for kind of the operation of the process. So they would take a development application from start to finish in that process. We wouldn't have them diverted to other activities, and we'll talk a little bit about how we address the rest of that. We would also bring the inspections division. So building inspections, the folks who actually issue the building permits, do the inspections, and finally issue a certificate of occupancy. So as you can see, that's sort of cradle to grave in the development review process. From the time economic development goes out and recruits a business to come to Provo until they build their building or remodel a building and we issue a certificate of occupancy, it's all in one department. So it runs from kind of cradle to grave. And they will be the host of the one-stop shop. So the one-stop shop will be located in the Development Services offices. The new department we have proposed calling Community and Neighborhood Services. I recognize that creates a few dilemmas, and we'll, again, we can address some of that as we go. We're certainly not married to the name, but it was the best description we could come up with. And we wanted to distinguish between the former Community Development Department and this new department. So in that department, we would retain long-range planning. So the 6 people who work for Bill Pepperoni and Bill would remain in the newly formatted department. We would retain zoning enforcement. We currently have 7 FTEs in zoning enforcement. We would likely also add business license enforcement. We find that's a pretty substantial overlap, and right now that's being done a little bit haphazardly by customer service. And we thought a more deliberate approach to that would probably be a good thing. We would retain
parking enforcement.
Still there. So parking enforcement we're proposing to leave currently in customer service. We'd like to move eventually to having that operate out of this reformatted department. But again, we're a little nervous about loading up our parking and sustainability coordinator yet with a lot of administrative burden. We'd like to get some problems solved first. So I think that will be iterative over time. But I would expect you'll see a proposal in the next year or two to move parking enforcement under a parking division. So we keep parking and sustainability, and then we take the federal funding staff, so Dan Gonzalez and the team in the redevelopment agency, and take them out of the RDA and move them into this new department. Most of what they've done over time has been community and neighborhood related. It's not really been redevelopment and economic development related. And we like the idea of having them talk regularly to the planners and the parking people and so on. We think having them all in the same staff meeting brings some synergy to the process that we maybe have been missing by having them isolated in the redevelopment agency.
It still would be funded from federal funds?
Still funded by federal funds, right. We'd still, yeah, none of that would change. The funding mechanisms would all stay the same as they are. A couple of years ago, we pulled Dave Walters' funding entirely out, so he's not subsidized at all by the CDBG program now. He's paid for entirely by general fund and tax increment, which is the way it should be. And so it's a good time now to try to make that break. So here's kind of the structure as we've laid it out. And again, you saw in your packets a chart like this. So these are the affected departments that are involved here. And so Community and Neighborhood Services have 21 full-time employees now with long-range planning, zoning enforcement, ombudsman, CDBG home staff, and parking and sustainability. The new Development Services Department has 17 FTEs, and we're actually having a conversation right now about, we're a little concerned that they're a little bit light on the administrative support side, particularly as it relates to running the CRC. And so we're looking at some ways as we're planning our budget development now to try to create an additional administrative position in that office. So it might end up at 18 by the time you see the budget document in May. And then we've shown kind of a dotted line to the one-stop shop because it is co-located, but all of these folks will contribute to the one-stop shop along with one representative from fire, and we're anticipating 2 from Public Works who would be centrally located. So they would again move downtown into the new, either into the space we currently have or into the new city center. So that's the general structure as we're proposing it. So let me try to answer a few questions. One of the more controversial questions that came up is what to do with boards and commissions. As you know, we have 6 or 7 boards and commissions that report to community, or that are housed in community development currently. That we looked at a proposal to actually move them all into development services. And again, from one standpoint, that seemed to make a lot of sense because it's all part of the streamlined effort. On the flip side, though, we were a little nervous about the lack of a firewall between the process, the legislative process as it goes through Planning Commission and Council, and whether we create an environment where we cause neighborhoods or individual residents or other stakeholders to feel like the skids are greased, we're just moving down this path as quickly as we can. And we worried a little bit about the concept of over-streamlining, I guess, in this case. And so the proposal is that we would move the Building Code Board of Appeals into the new Department of Development Services, largely because the staff for that group is in Development Services now, with the building official and the building inspectors. But that we would leave all other boards with Community and Neighborhood Services. Again, that's a little controversial. It's not been universally applauded by the management team, but we think it's the right answer. And there's one specific board, though, that caused us some additional labor, and that was the TMAC group. We've sensed that we've burdened the TMAC with some challenges since its inception a couple of years ago. One is we've housed it in community development, and long-range planners have things to do with transportation planning. But the principal function of transportation planning has been in engineering, and it's been there for years. And that's created some angst between the staff and the TMAC members themselves, who have felt conflicted over varying opinions. And as I've told a number of folks who expressed concern about this, I don't think that's all bad. Some dissonance is a good thing. It forces you to think hard about issues and makes you make difficult decisions. So rather than moving it into development services or moving it into public works, both of which we thought long and hard about, the conclusion was that we can tolerate a little dissonance in order to get a better outcome. And so we're probably okay, at least in the short run, leaving it in community and neighborhood services, but the jury may still be out on that one. So we opted not to disrupt that currently, but would like to reserve the right to come back and look at that as development services maybe progresses. But we did conclude that it's probably best aligned with long-range planning and should probably stay wherever that is. So budget impact, again, we mentioned development services would add 17, potentially an 18th position. Community and neighborhood services would have 21 full-time employees. So these are two relatively small departments, but the tasks are pretty large for them. So compared to a Parks and Recreation department or a Public Works department or a police department, or a fire department, it's a pretty small group in both cases. But I think the division of labor and this ability to have accountability from stem to stern on development approval processes is important. So one of the questions we were asked is, why not just bring engineering over to community development and be done? And there are some in our stakeholder groups that thought that was the best potential alternative. So we come back to the balancing test question. And so we looked around, we talked to other cities, we actually had a team go out and visit other cities and attend CRC meetings in those communities, and the consensus we got back was there's no consensus about the right organization of engineering. So we talked to a couple of cities where engineering's been moved into community development or into a development services department. What we hear from the development services department is it's great, we love it, we coordinate well. When you talk to the public works team, the answer is, not so much. Sometimes developments get approved that create problems downstream where the development review engineer didn't know enough to ask a question about it, or it wasn't something that was obvious in the GIS system. And so as we talked with some of the cities, we were concerned about the breakdown. And if you've got to have a breakdown, do you want it in your, in your infrastructure, maintenance and operation, or do you want it in the development review process? So again, we felt like we needed to balance better. We thought co-location was a really good step in the right direction by putting all the same people who do development review, including engineers from other departments, in one space so that we encourage the dialogue and they sit together and talk about these issues. And we also thought by the changes we're proposing to the CRC process, we overcome a lot of those concerns. And so we felt like on balance, this was the right way to go. Again, as things develop, we'll see. But we think right now, based on what we know and think now, that's the right answer. Dave?
So I remember one project, it was a Central Park Station where everything was going fine until, I think it was the Parks Department decided,
yes, hey,
we need a trail here.
Yep.
So are they...
So hang on. You'll see that as we move forward with this. Second piece is the one-stop shop. We've talked a lot about this. Headquartered in development services, all related staff, regardless of structure, would be in one place. Current planners would kind of be the lead folks. They would own a project, again, from start to finish. We'd put at least 2 public works engineers and a fire marshal in the one-stop shop, and then the new development services director would have, again, responsibility and accountability and authority from stem to stern. And we think the one-stop shop is an important innovation in this process. Now, the CRC process has been reviewed for some time. We've had a couple of years of discussions around what to do with CRC. Historically, it's been the group of all department reviewers, and there have been times when I've walked into a CRC meeting and there have been 30 city staffers in the room from various departments and divisions. Some of them sit around with not very much to do for most of the meeting, and then they'll chime in when it kind of comes to the issue they came for. It's been pretty unwieldy. It's not unusual if I were to go in today to the City View product and take a look at development review, it would not be uncommon to see one project have been discussed 8 times in various CRC meetings. And so this disconnect has sort of happened, I think largely because there have been so many people playing a role here has been one of the significant problems. In fact, talking to a couple of developers and their engineers, they've said, if you do nothing else but this, you will have solved 90% of the problem. We may not even need a structural change if you solve this problem. So the recommendations, we had a small working group. Dave Decker served on that group. Bill Pepperoni chaired it to come in with recommendations on changes to the CRC process. So a couple of changes they suggested was that we create a much smaller group, a group of about 9 or 10 individuals who would be members of the CRC. We would have others that would be welcome to come from the staff for a given application. So we define, as we do the first review of the application, who needs to be in the room. We would agenda every CRC meeting, and we expect these will go, now sometimes they work from an hour to an hour and a half. We expect these will be 4 to 5 hour meetings. Now, they'll be much more intense. We'll do a lot of the work in the meeting as opposed to sending people off to their departments to do review work. We'll require a series of mandatory meetings with applicants and/or engineers, and so including a pre-application, so before they submit formal plans to the city, that they come in and just have a scoping discussion with the CRC. We would expect the first meeting after application has been finalized and submitted. We would have a mandatory meeting with the developer or engineer, and then we would do one at pre-construction. And so once all the development review and approval are completed and the permits are all issued, before they start construction, we would also have a mandatory meeting to talk about any field issues that have come up. The recommendation has been that we set a maximum of 2 city reviews instead of 8 or 9, assuming the applicant makes no changes. So again, we avoid this moving target issue of we think we got approval and then we move a little ways down the road and all of a sudden there are new requirements. And so it's going to force our city staff to do a much more thorough job of review in the process. And then if the developer comes back and says, oh, I want to move this knuckle up 3 houses in my subdivision, now can you come look at it? That will trigger another city review. But again, assuming there are no changes and the developer proceeds with his plans, we'll cap our number of reviews at 2. And so if we miss something in the review, shame on us. It's not shame on the developer. So, and then the CRC would be chaired by a decision maker. Right now, the CRC is chaired by a coordinator who makes sure that all the information gets in and out, but there's really no decision maker that sits in the room. And so, so the mayor has, well, let me move to the next step, which is kind of implementation. So, if we go to the last one first, CRC changes by May 1st, and that's our plan, is the first week in May we would start the new CRC process. The mayor's asked me to chair that group between now and the time we get a new development services director in place, and thereafter the new development services director will be the chair of the CRC. And so we'll put a department director level position at the head of the CRC, which we think will eliminate a lot of the past communication issues and challenges. And I think it's a pretty amazing thing to think about, that you would have a department director level person who wakes up every morning thinking about development review process. Right now, that's not the case. Development review is kind of, in most cases, and not in every case, but in most cases, it's job number 2. You know, if you've got a design engineer who's working on designing a storm drain line, that's going to be job 1 because they're ready to get this project out to contract, and sometimes job number 2 is development review. In this case, our expectation is that everybody in the new development services department, for job 1 is development review for them every morning when they arrive until they go home at night. So again, organizational changes by sometime this summer. We'll have a budget impact, and so we expect that you'll review that process in the mayor's recommended budget and have to make some difficult priority decisions. And so we want to make sure that before we actually go out and recruit and make changes, that we're not hiring somebody for whom we're not going to have funding come July 1. And so we want to ensure that we've been through the full vetting process on this from a budget standpoint. Location changes as opportunities present. So we're going to look for opportunities to do some of this co-location even before we have the new building. There's some things we can do to shuffle cubicles around and move data and phone jacks and those kinds of things. If we can make some of that work cost effectively in our current building, we will do as much of that as we can, but we will anticipate the full-blown implementation of the one-stop shop will be part of the new city center project. So that's timing. Final comments, I mentioned we are not at consensus. I think that's okay. Again, a little dissonance is a good thing. We expect some controversy. We think there will be some who will think we haven't gone far enough. There will be others who think we've gone too far. I think we'll hear from some in the community that will say we should make development as difficult as we can because we've got to protect against bad things happening. We think we're finding a pretty good middle ground that's transparent and accessible to our residents. And then finally, this probably isn't perfect, but we think it's a really, really good next step in the process. So with that, that's the quick summary. You have our staff memo. Again, we've got more work to do. We've gotten largely through the Title II amendments, which we'll get to Brian shortly, but we also recognize that all through Titles 14 and 15, there are things where it says the director shall, and right now it's obvious because there's only one of those, but now that there'll be two, we've got to draw some distinctions in the code. So we'll be spending some time on that over the next couple, 3 months and trying to get that part of the code sort of cleaned up so this is ready to go once the council's made the decision to move forward. So with that, I've probably taken my 30 minutes, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
So I was just going to mention that yeah, we're
I know we're on time.
We're right at 30 minutes,
okay.
So I wonder if this is something that the council members can email.
Absolutely.
Email you.
Yep. Or we could schedule some time at another meeting
okay.
if you want to do that to do a Q&A. But hopefully this at least introduces you to where our thinking's been and what we think is the best answer here. So and I give Mayor Kafusi kudos. These things have been discussed for years, and it's great to have the political will to make some hard decisions here, and that's so I appreciate her willingness to take this on. So, David.
Just a brief comment, having kind of grappled with this problem for several years, I think this is great. I appreciate the concept. I thought it was a great presentation. I love that you're thinking about the good to great concepts and all of that in this. So I'm excited about it.
I can't remember when Louisville has announced the one-stop shopping.
Yep.
Were you on board then?
Oh, yes.
And I remember that being on the council and I'm going, wow, it's finally happening.
Yeah. And it was a really good attempt. We didn't go far enough, and I think this will get us far enough. So the last one I would consider to be a tweak to the development process, and this is pretty substantial change. So
good luck chairing that committee.
Thank you. I've been trying to figure out how to free up 4 or 5 hours of time, and it may not only be once a week either. We've been kind of warned that cities who do this well spend 8 to 10 hours a week doing nothing but CRC type work. So yeah, so I've been trying to figure out how I'm going to find that time, but we'll make it work.
So unless there's objections, we will forward comments and questions to the administration via email, and
yes, we'll be happy to meet, or we're happy to come back to a future work session.
That's my only concern, is that I think I'm sure we would be able to send comments, but I would like to have more discussion at another point.
So we will.
Seems like it would be healthy.
Yeah. I actually have several notes here, but just with time and what we're trying to accomplish, I'm not going to do that. But yeah, let's schedule this for a future meeting. Come back and just have more of a discussion. But that was a great presentation.
Okay.
Thank you
Thanks very much.
Item 4 is a discussion regarding the proposed ordinance amendment prohibiting the sale of dogs, cats, and rabbits from commercial animal establishments. Mr. Strachan, our executive director, is presenting this, and we have it budgeted for 15 minutes.
All right. We should go up just a bit.
Okay, good. I got the version I wanted. Council, 2 weeks ago, we discussed an ordinance amending the code regarding the sale of dogs, cats, and rabbits at commercial animal establishments. And we mentioned that 11 cities in Utah have adopted similar ordinances. Talked about the impetus for it now with some stories in the Daily Herald and trying to prevent problems before they happen. Council members had some questions last time, and so today's presentation really is just to answer those questions. There are 3 reasons to adopt the ordinance. One is to promote adoptions of rescued and abandoned pets. One is to address the concern over the prevalence of puppy mills, cat mills, rabbit mills, etc., and to preempt the possibility of those happening in Provo. And a third is something that you do generally, and that is the general health and welfare of people and pets in Provo. With parvovirus and similar viruses affecting puppies, cats, and rabbits, they can cause sickness and deaths in our pets. So let me answer some questions. How does this affect existing business? There's one pet store in Provo, Jay's Jungle. It does not sell dogs and cats, but sometimes rabbits. The owner isn't bothered by the ordinance, but wondered why we are exempting breeders. That was his question. A pet supply store, Rocco and Roxy, does not sell animals. They just do the supplies, and so it doesn't affect them. A company called Goo Goo Dogs does grooming, and the owner does breed golden doodles at home. He thinks the ordinance would be good for him on both sides, but he doesn't see he doesn't sell the dogs in his store. The IFA, Intermountain Farmers, sells chicks and rabbits. Last year they sold 128 rabbits. With rabbits selling in the store right now for $30 each, the gross revenue for them would have been about $3,840 last year just for the sale of the rabbits. Part of their business also is the supply of materials, cages, etc. for the rabbits. The manager says that 4-H participants and others buy them to show and raise, and then other people use them as a starter pet idea. Rather than getting a cat or a dog, we'll try you with a rabbit. He noted that if a rabbit were returned, he could not mix them with the other rabbits and would have to keep them separate, and that, of course, is for health reasons. He does oppose the rabbits portion of this draft ordinance and may be at the meeting tonight to speak against it. According to Provo's Customer Service Department, there is one licensed kennel, Rickmar Kennels in Provo. They've been licensed since 1998, and Chapter 8.05 of the Provo Code is titled Kennels and covers dog and cat kennels. So there is an ordinance. One thing I could tell you is I did not see anything where we actually separately licensed breeders, and I'll come to that in a minute. The South Utah Valley Animal Shelter in Spanish Fork is the go-to shelter for city animal control officers from Provo to Santaquin. Provo Animal Control has told them not to accept stray rabbits from Provo as the city does not want to pay for their care. The shelter tracks the numbers of dogs, cats, and other animals. Rabbits are included in other animals. And that's pretty consistent in the industry. So how does, the question came up, why not breeders? So how does Provo treat its breeders? It doesn't license them, and there's nothing in city code about breeders. Provo City Code 8.06.07, allowable number of dogs or cats, exempts licensed kennels, catteries, grooming parlors, or pet shops from the maximum number of animals you're allowed to have. He started his political career with number of what, cats?
Dogs and cats.
Dogs and cats. So who does license breeders? The United States Department of Agriculture, or USDA, is the agency responsible for overseeing the commercial dog breeding industry and enforcing the Animal Welfare Act.
Any breeder who wishes to sell to a pet store or to consumers over the internet with 5 or more breeding females must be licensed with the USDA. Some states do, but Utah doesn't have additional laws regarding the breeding of dogs, cats, or rabbits. According to a website called the Puppy Mill Project, the USDA is overburdened with 110 inspectors nationwide for approximately 8,800 facilities. Those that do get inspected experience leniency by the inspectors. It's probably a workload issue. So one of the questions was, are there other approaches? And so my answer is a little flippantly, it's probably some jurisdictions do nothing. Sandy City regulates dog breeding under a dog hobby permit program. Midvale City requires a license in addition to a kennel license, granting responsible breeders a 5-year license, requires records, and notes that breeders may be inspected by the Animal Control Division. Similarly, Salt Lake City requires a license. So those are just 3 examples in the state that do them. And the ordinance that we've crafted at your request does not contemplate breeders. That would be in a whole different chapter we could set up if that's something the council's interested in. So what about rabbits? The rabbit industry has many groups with different production goals. Rabbits are used for meat, as pets, for hobby, and for laboratory purposes. For pets or for hobbies, rabbits are raised for the show circuit, thinking 4-H and others, home consumption, or as pets. The American Rabbit Breeders Association sponsors 4,000 shows per year. There does not appear to be an association for pet rabbit producers. The USDA regulates producers breeding pets for wholesale trade and for direct deliveries to stores. So we heard about that.
So I'm familiar with problems with parvo, dog and cat viruses and diseases. I've never heard of anything with rabbits.
There's something similar. I can't remember what the name was. It was on some of my earlier notes, but they do sometimes get affected by similar issues.
And was that discussed when you talked to IFA?
Yeah, that's why if he gets it
separate,
when they get ones returned, because they don't know what they've been exposed to or what they're carrying.
It just seems like the majority of the problems.
Dogs and cats is the majority.
Yes.
Yes. So what is a commercial animal establishment? The question may have arisen because the draft ordinance I posted out left out language used in several draft ordinances, namely references to any pet shop, retail businesses, or commercial animal establishments. So we've added a definition here that a commercial animal establishment is any pet shop, retail business, or commercial establishment that engages in activities regulated by this chapter. So hopefully that clarifies the groups that we're anticipating with this ordinance. So finally, what are some of the options for council to consider? One is to do nothing. That is, add no regulations to the city code prohibiting the sale, etc., of dogs, cats, or rabbits. In other words, we wouldn't bother with this tonight, or you'd vote it down. 2, adopt the ordinance as drafted, and I would suggest with the amendments that we've put in. Only dogs, cats, or rabbits obtained from shelters or humane societies or rescue organizations could be transferred to patrons at a commercial establishment. That's how that would apply. And then limit or expand the ordinance as the council determines is appropriate or desired. And so with respect to that, Hannah, can you bring up that other? So with respect to that, there's 2 ways to address the rabbit issue. One is to just delete rabbits as a reference entirely. The other is to provide some kind of prior business exemption for businesses that are already selling rabbits. Of course, we only have 1. So I'm going to defer momentarily to Brian to just talk about his thinking in this language.
So this is, Cliff had asked me to provide some language. This is just 2 alternative ways of doing the same thing I proposed. They both seem to do the same thing to me, but if one of them seems clearer to somebody else, then we could pick either one. Now, this grandfathering exemption would not apply just to rabbits. It would apply to anybody that is currently doing business, but only for the same type of animal that they're currently selling. But based on what Cliff just presented as far as his research and stuff, it doesn't seem like it would actually apply to anybody else other than IFA.
So this is on the agenda tonight. If you you could choose right now to make some changes or whatever. But right now the form on the, can you go back to the other one, Hannah? The document that I believe is in your packets, does it have this?
If this was the version that was attached on Thursday, then yes, it's in the packets.
Okay, well, we'll make sure, but this is, we recommend you have this language, and if you need to make an amendment to.
It's not in the version I have, but
that was Thursdays. So tonight, if you want to consider that, you'll need to make that amendment before you adopt the ordinance, and if you want to make some of the other amendments that are possible, you can do that as well.
Would you like me to email this version to the council? So that they have
Yeah, you can. Only some of them have computers with them, but we'll print out a copy for you instead.
So if you were to define a breeder would not be a retail business?
Not under this definition.
Well, if you scroll down and look at .030, that provision specifically exempts breeders.
Okay.
How many cats and/or dogs are allowed? I think it's 2 is allowed, at least in some zones. In the RA and A zones, are more cats and dogs allowed? Because what I'm thinking, just having read Janelle's article, that talks about several different stories of different people, and at least the ones that she was highlighting, they were all people that have 2, maybe 3 dogs, and they breed them. You know, their dog has a litter every 6 or 7 months, and then they, sell their litter through the puppy barn, for example. So we're not talking like large puppy mills. We're not talking, because I believe those just wouldn't be allowed in Provo just because of the limits that we have on cats and dogs. So when I read breeders there, I'm not thinking of like an establishment that has 40 dogs and they're constantly having puppies. I'm thinking, this is someone who has a couple of dogs, or maybe just one dog, and they pair up with another one, and they have a litter, and then they sell them. And they might not see themselves as breeders. They might have a litter unexpectedly, an unintentional litter, after 6 months.
So it's section 8.06.070, and so it's no more than 2 dogs and no more than 2 cats 6 months of age or older.
Right.
So if they do have a litter, they just have that window of time.
And that happened to my neighbor. They had a litter, they had the puppies, and they knew, 6 months is coming up, we're going to need to sell these puppies. And so this exemption allows that. So if someone has a litter, they have up to 6 months to have those puppies. But at 6 months, they have to have them gone, whether that's by selling, whether that's by transferring, giving away, whatever. And so to me, that's what that exemption was. That allows people to to sell these and some people do it. It's almost like a side business a little bit, but it's just 2 dogs that they own that are having litters.
And they could do, so what this would allow was, it would allow them to continue to do that and do it from their home, but they could not do is then sell them to a store and have the store sell them at a profit.
Correct.
Right.
And if I could just bring, I think this was copied from some other cities. I think that paragraph right there was actually aimed at the big commercial breeders, because everything you just described they could do anyway, even if we took that out, because they are not a retail shop, pet store, or commercial establishment. So selling them, so an individual selling, personal pets from their home would never be captured by the ordinance as it's written anyway. But it would apply to if they sold it to a store. The store would be in violation when they tried to sell them.
So we didn't give this enough time. I think we only have a couple of minutes. I have a thought, and then maybe looking for for suggestions on how we might.
Well, you can, you have time tonight to make any amendments or anything. The purpose of this presentation was just to answer the questions that were asked last time.
Okay.
And so I think we've done that. If you want to have more deliberation on what to do, you can certainly do that in the broader meeting tonight.
Okay. So I have a kind of proposal on how to proceed. Do we have others, or do we just have discussion points that we can discuss in tonight's meeting?
I was just curious if the administration had gotten any feedback on this or had any thoughts for us on it.
It's been interesting because we've discussed this a couple meetings now, and my expectation was this must be a hot topic in the community. I should be hearing about it, and I actually have not heard a word, just only what I've heard in here. So we've heard nothing pushing back or either way. It's been very quiet.
Okay, so my thought is, I've looked at this, and this seemed like a really perhaps urgent issue, you know, because of what our neighbor was dealing with. But as I've looked into it, we don't have a lot of these sales taking place at all in Provo. I don't know, the more I look into it, the more I wonder. I don't think it's going to be a big deal either way, but I'm wondering if that's the case, is this worth proceeding with? I'd be interested to see if we even want to discuss it in tonight's meeting, or we just say we looked into it, we did due diligence, and we feel like it's just not important enough to add legislation on.
So you're saying if it's not a problem, don't look for solutions?
That's more and more. That's kind of what I'm coming to, and the only reason I bring that up now is if we want to continue, we could just knock it off of our.
It was meant to be, when it was first suggested and council members got behind looking into it. It was meant as a preemptive strike against having the problems that some cities have faced with, say, Puppy Barn and others. That's why the council members who had indicated support for it had said that, because they were willing to look at it as a preemptive. Let's not get the problem and then have to try and deal with it.
So of the people we've talked to, other than IFA having a problem with the rabbits, who else had a problem?
Nobody.
So personally, I would either take the rabbits out completely or give them the exemption. And I think it is kind of proactive and looking forward to it. You know, I've had friends bring home animals and they're sick, and it's very disturbing for the family, the child. So if we can prevent that kind of illness, that would be positive.
In regards to your question about tonight, I would propose that we leave it on just because we have citizens that sometimes are prepared to come and present their view and they may not hear the postponed.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay, excellent. So we'll move on. We are a few minutes over, so we will move on. We'll have more discussion tonight. Thank you, Cliff, for looking into that for us. Actually, I do have one other question. I don't know if it's possible to find the answer for between now and our discussion later, but how many puppies that are sold, I guess, along the Wasatch Front, how many of them are from out of state? I guess I kind of have the feeling that a lot of them were coming in from out of state, but reading the newspaper article gave me the impression that a lot of this is just these onesie-twosie litters that are...
I don't know the answer to that, okay. But I will tell you on the rabbits, just because I looked at this long report about rabbits, the rabbits, there are no breeders, no licensed breeders of rabbits in Utah, according to the document I saw. My guess is that there are a fair number that come into the state from outside, but I think you get that anywhere.
Okay.
Can I just make a quick comment here? One of our shortages that we did when we did our economic study was in the pet section. And it was and I've had people come to me, you're going to eliminate pet stores from coming to Provo, good pet stores from coming to Provo if we do something like this.
And I don't know that you would. You still have, you know, if Petco or PetSmart, which are the two biggest, if they saw a demand for, I think they've got one of those in Orem. If they felt the need was there in Provo, they would come here. Now they do pet adoptions, but they are dog adoptions and cat adoptions, and they do it through the shelters.
so.
That's just a comment I've received.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. We will proceed to our break, and we will keep this to 5 minutes. So we will be starting at 2:47. So please do whatever business you have quickly and get back here as soon as you can. We adjourn and move on to item number 5.
Adjourn.
Yes.
We reconvene. Are we gonna adjourn again?
Well, D adjourn.
There we go.
We'll reconvene. Thank you all. Appreciate you guys keeping me straight. Item number 5, a discussion regarding the proposed community land trust request for proposal / request for qualifications. This will be presented by Mr. David Walter, the Director of Redevelopment, and we have a full 5 minutes budgeted to this.
Council Chair, members of the council, thank you very much. Excuse me. The reason for bringing this back to you today was to kind of give you an update. So we did prepare the RFP/RFQ. Council office was kind enough to go through and clean up my mistakes before it went out. And we did talk to both Ms. Wild and Mr. Vernon, who are the most logical respondents, or would be for the local aspect, and asked them if they would be interested in pursuing this. They've taken a look at it. Ms. Wild has indicated that her preference would be to partner with Mr. Vernon as they move forward on their countywide proposal. And Mr. Vernon's preference was to probably come back with an alternative proposal to the council at a later date for their consideration. So we just wanted to apprise the council of that and see if you still wanted to issue the RFP on a nationwide basis to see if we get any further interest from groups outside Utah County.
Feedback from council members about preferences. I think my preference at this point, at this juncture, would be to perhaps have a little bit more of a policy discussion. Where do we want to be? Are we committed to this? We're committed to the related. You know, we've had discussions, but I don't think we've ever made any decisions about inclusionary zoning, about any of this stuff. And so I think perhaps we should make sure. And I think the work that went into this is probably helpful because we can then read through and kind of get a bit better picture of what this might look like. I think that's been a good exercise, but I do feel like probably the most important thing right now is to find out what we think the policy should be and start making some policy decisions, and then perhaps engaging with the broader community. I should probably say that after, but before asking people to put together proposals based on policies that we haven't committed to. So maybe those were my thoughts.
So even though we don't have necessarily a resolution saying that we want all future housing projects of a certain type, nature, or location to be having affordable housing component, we still have people coming forward like the mix. It's kind of like the flavor of the day.
So when the mix came forward, they requested a change in the zoning, and the planning department asked if, for them to provide affordable housing as part of that, not as an extraction, but because they are requesting a zone change, they felt it was appropriate to ask them to provide some form of affordable housing on the site, whether that was units that they built directly or that they paid an in lieu fee for that process. I believe the development agreement that's currently being negotiated with the mix includes an in lieu payment. They're talking about how big that should be and how many, so forth. But the issue is going to be is what entity is going to kind of receive that money. Is it going to be the city? Is it going to be the redevelopment agency? Is it going to be another nonprofit organization? Would it be this community land trust that would be set up? So. And as we move forward, whether it's through the inclusionary zoning process or through these other venues where, say, another developer came in and requested a zone change, and we asked them to make a in lieu payment or provide affordable housing directly, there's going to be should be some mechanism on how we're going to receive those funds. If we're the entity receiving them, are we going to commit to building those units within a set period of time? We're going to contract that out with, say, if Mr. Vernon does, when he does establish his countywide process, would we contract with him to establish that, and then our in lieu payments become part of that cash flow for him.
So I would say this is an appropriate step to put this out and see the response that we get from Robert or whoever, but certainly Robert, I think, would respond. And as far as our policy going forward, there's different ways to articulate the policy, and one of them in this case was planning, community development, letting the developer know that this is what would be appropriate. This is what's wanted.
So you're proposing that we do go ahead and release that RFP, RFQ.
See what kind of response we
see
get.
what kind of response. And you are aware, at least what I understood, is that just through informal conversations, the preference of Mr. Vernon and the organizations he represents is that he would just come out with a counter proposal at a future date. So his preference wouldn't necessarily be to release this RFP. You think it would still be, that's what he would prefer, to release this RFP?
Well, if you release it, at least it starts a conversation. And it's a proposal that then they can do a counter proposal and say, well, we would love to work with you on this basis.
Okay.
Is this, it starts a conversation, but shouldn't that conversation start here rather than out in the public with somebody else that we're sending an RFP?
Well, we already have someone that has established a community land trust. I don't know that anyone else is going to bother. And so the conversation we need to have is with the land trust that has already been formed and say, how can we work together? And we can give him our idea of what we think would work for Provo, and he could come back and say, well, that's great. Let's change it a little bit here and there because this is how I do business, or would like to do business.
Well, and shouldn't that be done here rather than just making the effort to do an RFQ, get them all working? Just have them do a presentation here so that we get, well, I don't know.
I'd be open to that if you just want to say that there's, we're only going to invite this one entity and we're going to work together.
And I don't know that it's just one entity, and maybe it's just an idea of understanding it a little bit more and opportunities that are available. I know that Robert has come and we have talked to some degree about it. I don't know how in depth we need to go. Or
well, when you do an RFP or RFQ, I mean, sometimes it's just procedures like, when the thing's big enough, you just put it out there and see what contractors or who's interested. And so it's a part of a formal process. And even though we only have one likely taker, you still give everyone the opportunity and then and see what happens.
So, in my opinion, the three most likely contenders that would reply locally would be NeighborWorks, NHS, Provo City Housing Authority, and maybe Habitat for Humanity. Those in my opinion, those would probably be the three most likely respondents to any RFP /RFQ that we would issue. And had conversations with Ms. Wild of NHS, and she's indicated that her preference would actually be to partner on a longer-term basis with Provo City Housing and work cooperatively with them moving forward with this. And I know that Mr. Vernon of Provo City Housing is working towards establishing a county-wide community land trust and has been holding several meetings with your counterparts in various cities as well as the county commission to garner a broad-based support for that. And I have not spoken to Habitat for Humanity. I haven't spoken to anyone on that organization if they would be interested. I know nationwide that Habitat does do some CLTs, but I don't know that locally that if they would have the capacity or the interest in moving forward with that. So, be more than happy to reach out to them.
This would give them the opportunity.
Correct.
If we put out the invitation.
If they would like to.
Are there any downsides in putting that out? Are we asking a lot of these organizations to put something together if we are not, if we haven't decided on our direction yet, or is that?
I think if they choose not to if they choose not to respond or submit an alternative proposal, I think that's a data point for us in our consideration. We do have access to a nationwide advocacy group. I'm going to draw a blank on the name right now. Yes, land. Thank you, Ms. Wild. So they can act. They act as an intermediary between public sector and different organizations. One of the issues that we should be considering is, is this going to be a citywide program? Is it going to be focused on primarily certain areas of the community to move forward? Are we going to do an inclusionary zoning component so that we have some sort of mechanism that kind of replenishes the land that's within the land trust? Are we going to give property that the redevelopment agency or the city, has control of right now? Is that going to be, are those assets going to be a part of this community land trust? So
typically, a community would probably have to start by saying, we're going to do inclusionary zoning before somebody would say, oh, well, maybe I'll do a land trust, because now there's a source of property or funding. But Robert kind of jumped the gun for whatever reasons, and he's already gone down the road of creating one, which actually was fortuitous, because when the mix came along, we actually had someone.
There's an entity that we could, legitimately say, hey, talk to Provo City Housing Authority, and they can be the recipient of the funds, and they can either they can contract out the construction of them or work with the mix to do that. So.
Okay. Do we have any? We look for a motion, and then we just vote on direction.
Well, didn't we already give direction to
it? Yeah, I mean, we can go ahead and issue it, and then come back to you with the responses at a later date.
Okay. So I guess I'm just looking for a motion to change that direction. Otherwise,
we will issue the RFP.
With that. Any motions to withdraw our direction? Okay, seeing none. Thank you. We more than doubled the time that we had allotted to this. But just council, and I'm looking for ideas. How can we move this discussion forward about CLTs, about inclusionary zoning, about how vehicles to move the discussion on affordable housing and housing affordability forward? If you'll ponder on that, and maybe shoot me an email if you have any great ideas, Mr. Moser.
If there's anything that you'd like to see changed in that RFP or direction that you'd like to see us, or Mr. Walter, I think that would be helpful too, if there's any certain elements.
Okay, so take a look at that and provide feedback. Mr.
I guess one of the question is, do you want, right now it's being titled RFQ or RFP, RFQ, given that you're not necessarily looking for a specific proposal to accept yet, this is how I'm understanding it, it might be better titled an RFI, request for information, and just gather the information that you need, and then work with whomever's got a better, the best information for you.
I like that much better personally, because then I feel that they can take it for what it is, and if they may not have time, and there still may be somebody that we want to work with in the future. So those that would be interested, I'd appreciate that. I think it's a good person.
Okay. Any objections to that? Okay, so I see you took note of that.
Yes, sir.
Perfect. Thank you for that suggestion. Okay, we will move on to item number 6, which is a policy discussion related to the neighborhood housing services approval proposal with regards to homes purchased with CDBG/MUNICIPAL. This is a follow-up to our discussion back in November. We have 25 minutes allotted to this, and it will be presented by Mr. Knecht or Mr. Walter, our Director of Redevelopment.
So this item, as you rightfully pointed out, in November we had a pretty comprehensive discussion. We met with Ms. Wild several times to talk about the process, and in putting together some of the information, talking with council staff, there was a question about, does this type of forgiveness, does it set a precedent? Is this maybe a policy decision the council could consider? I do know that when we try to put these CDBG agreements and home agreements together, there is a lot of boilerplate that goes in there. Some of that is a result of the nature of the funding. and what has to be in there, but some of the details tend to be more on a case-by-case basis, on an individual basis. And so it's certainly, I mean, if the council, I'm going to phrase this correctly. So we're not suggesting that we pull back on the process. It's just that we just want to make sure that as we move forward, we're not creating an unrealistic expectation that everybody else is going to have this same sort of venue available to them. There's certainly nothing to prevent those people from requesting a forgiveness, but you know, this is a fairly unique case. So for those of you that have read Nassim Taleb's book, The Black Swan, this was an event that wasn't foreseen, struck everybody, came completely out of left field, so to speak. And so it was, I think, in working with NHS, we modified it, we made some changes. As we moved forward past the 2011 period, there was a little bit of miscommunication on where we were in the process. Ms. Wild brought some things to our attention that we didn't know about at the time. And so I think it's still appropriate for us to move forward with the modification of it, but in discussions with council staff, we just wanted to make sure that we're not establishing some sort of precedent that other participants in the CDBG/home program could come forward and say, hey, things didn't work out for me, you know, can I please have a forgiveness as well. Mr. Knapp.
So going forward, establishing a clear policy that would give clarity to both the service provider that we're contracting with and the city, having a clause in there about a catastrophic event or a force majeure where it's something like you say a black swan event, and in that case where your partner, your service provider is not at fault.
Correct.
Therefore, you come back and you say, well, what can we do here? Because in reality, these nonprofits are not signing up to take on a project that's going to lose them a lot of money.
Correct. So, not to be plugging Mr. Taleb's book, but the title of another one of his books is Skin in the Game, and I believe, you know, Ms. Wild and her organization certainly has skin in this game, where they've done the work, they've worked with us, they've tried to make it happen. So, it's not, it's more of a, I believe, we just didn't want to, as we move forward with this, and we tend to come back and modify the loans with a resolution that'll do what we talked about earlier in the year, we just did not want to establish or take away your right to establish a council policy moving forward.
Also, it seemed like when we voted on these projects, because it was done typically on a case-by-case basis, and it was like, if you can bring in the rehab below a certain price, and that was often based on a performer that was presented to the council, and so if it was $15,000 or $20,000, whatever, then it would be an automatic deal. But if it somehow went over that, you'd have to come back, and the council would have to review it and approve it based on the new circumstance.
We could certainly do something like that.
Well, I think that's how we used to.
So I think that's how they tried to do it in the past.
Yeah, and so here, unfortunately, because of the economic downturn, we are doing a reevaluation of how can we resolve this. And the only thing I would kind of question is Franklin Commons, because I was surprised to see it on here, because I thought the actual language of the contract specified that if there was no profit, that nothing was owed the city.
I don't think there is anything owed to the city on that one. So.
The what?
I don't think there is anything owed to the city on that one.
Yeah, okay. So going forward, I would say that we should have a policy that would be very clear about these type of events, and also something about the affordability clause,
so some of the affordability requirements come from the amount of money that's put in relative to the value of the house. So if you put in so much, you have a longer, if it's over $40,000, you have a longer period of time than if it's between 15 and 40. And if it's less than 15, you have a much smaller affordability period.
Right, and the amount of affordability, if it goes out of affordability, there's like a penalty.
There can be, yes.
Yeah, there can be. And HUD holds Provo City responsible for that. And I was a little confused on this, whether we were then trying to pass on that responsibility contractually to...
So in our standard contracts we do, they are, you know, that a subrecipient is responsible for ensuring the affordability of the people that are there.
Right, I've read that,
yes.
But I never have read that if you fail and it goes out of affordability, that there's this penalty and you owe it.
I think that language is.
So I just read the 2011.
Yeah, I think there's. I think in the later contracts, I'm fairly certain that language is already in there.
Yeah, that's an important point, to make sure that we make it very clear who is responsible if it goes out of compliance.
So our current contracts, they do the subrecipient and whoever in the case, in whatever case that it be, that they do bear that burden. So,
David, who polices that, and how would you find out that they're in compliance?
I think they would just be looking over the documentation that the subrecipients are required to provide back.
I mean, if someone 10 years down the road or 15 years down, 12 years down the road from now, and one goes 15 years, how do you know about their compliance?
We do, yes, sir. We do periodically get audited by HUD, so.
If they audited and found that it was out of compliance, then you would be responsible.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Harmon?
Sorry, my thoughts are a little bit scattered. So, I guess one thing that I don't want to lose here is, at least I don't know about these properties, but it seems that with some properties in the past, there have been properties that have been really run down. Perhaps they're contaminated from misuse and whatever. And so partners have taken those on, rehabilitated them, brought them back, made them a positive asset to the community, even though the money they put in is more than what they can expect to get back out when they sell it. I don't want to lose that. So however we do this, you know, I think there's times where we are looking for partners to take those on, and
I know Ms. Wild's organization has been in the forefront of that process, and that there have been several properties that were illegally converted into apartments that in some cases were pretty uninhabitable. In fact, you know, they've ever been inspected by the county health department. They probably would have spectacularly failed. So, and Ms. Wild's organization has done an exemplary job of going through and cleaning that up and returning them to, you know, in some cases, instead of just scraping the property, which I would be inclined to say, let's not, you know, just scrape it and start over. We'd be better off that way. That they've turned some of these properties around and put them back to a more productive use.
Yeah, and so I think that's a great partnership that we have on that.
I agree.
There seems to be some concerns on the ones that the affordability period hasn't ended, that the city could be on the hook or whatever. It seems like with these write-offs or forgiveness or whatever we want to call them, you know, with provisions, because it's just kind of, you know, in passive tense, you know, if they fall out of compliance, well, you know, it seems like we could write something in that would say, we'll forgive this amount, that you guarantee that they won't fall out of compliance, and if they do, then, you know.
And we are working with our HUD representatives in Denver to make sure that the appropriate language for what is there is, and can be done is done.
Two more. One, it seems like in November, I think the council voted unanimously and gave pretty clear direction, you know, that let's accept that proposal, and it seems like the proposal's still.
Yes, here, so. And we're not arguing that. We're intending to move forward and bring this back to you for approval, all the different agreements. We just wanted to make sure that we're not stepping on your policy toes as we move forward.
Okay. And then I guess the last thing, and just due to time, I'll ask the question. Maybe we can talk offline. But with the Franklin Commons, we're looking at, subsidies less than $15,000, place on Ninth, it was like $18,000 per unit or whatever. Joaquin Retreat was almost $16,000, a subsidy to 1 unit. This is the way that it's written here. Those $15,000 investments per unit, I think those seem reasonable to me. I would really love to know the story behind. It doesn't seem like we're stretching our dollars very well if we're subsidizing a single unit for $216,000.
Did you want Charlene to respond?
Probably outside the meeting, just because of time,
Sure.
but that's just one thing that.
I'd be happy to tell you the story.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a story.
Excellent. Thank you.
So it's not, right now we're pursuing through the home program. One of our consortium partners, Utah County Housing Authority, is pursuing the acquisition of a fourplex in Orem for roughly $382,000. And only 2 of those units moving forward are going to be affordable. So that's almost, not quite 200,000, you do my math. So 190 per unit.
But the one in Joaquin is a special case.
Yeah, there's a story behind that one.
So I'd love to hear that story outside of the meeting.
Okay. And are there any other questions for me, Council?
So do we need to give any further direction, or things are just going to go forward?
As I understand the motion, you don't need to. My question to you is, what is the next step forward, and how does it involve council?
I don't think I need to come back to work session. I think the next time would be to come to you in a council meeting and have you approve the resolution modifying the agreements.
Okay. Following the proposal that we saw last November and
Yes.
see before us.
Yes.
Okay. Any concerns, any objections? Otherwise, we will move on. Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walter. We will now move on to item number 7, discussion regarding the proposed ordinance to amend downtown streetscape standards to clarify right-of-way improvements for 100 West. This will be presented. Okay. Oh, we are a little earlier. Okay. We have Mr. Decker here. Okay. Yes, Mr. Strzok.
Can I make a suggestion that if Mr. Weaver comes, we can even reach out and try and just defer him till tonight, because he was only giving us an update and then we were speaking tonight.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but 4 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, we heard this item in council meeting, in work meeting.
Yes.
That was the general plan amendment, and I believe this is the related code change. So the related code.
Right, but I think that was also downtown streetscapes.
Regarding the downtown master plan, which is a component of it.
Did we approve that in council meeting? I thought we approved that.
There are 2 separate items related to approving item 1.
Okay, well, so yeah, if we can reach out to him and just ask him to be here
tonight.
Okay. Unless there's objections.
Right.
Okay, excellent. So we will move on to our final item, which is a discussion about wastewater recommendations, treatment resolution, and code changes, presented by Mr. Dave Decker, Director of Public Works. And we have 60 minutes budgeted for this item, but we've been asked to do what we can to adjourn a little early, go into closed session. So your help would be appreciated.
I think we're going to be able to accomplish that. So,
okay.
Do you want to cover the other item that?
Okay. Let's. Oh, if that's all right, we'll switch to Mr. Weaver first. So we'll do item number 7. This is 5 minutes. So this is a discussion regarding a proposed ordinance to amend downtown streetscape standards to clarify right-of-way improvements for 100 West.
So a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the downtown master plan for the 100 West section. This is just to follow up with that. We're looking at the streetscape standards, seeing how the pedestrian corridor could be enhanced by adding some additional standards to the corridor. So again, this is showing the location of where it will be, the cross-section that we discussed a couple of weeks ago regarding it. These are just some concept ideas showing when it is built out how it could possibly look as well. One thing new we wanted to incorporate was having mid-block crossings along the 100 West section. 100 West 3rd South area concept. A few things that we wanted to incorporate into the streetscapes for 100 West is having the street name embedded into the on the corners along the section. A lot of the pioneer neighborhoods has this already. Wanted to make sure this continues to be happening in this area. Another thing, I talked with Power regarding the lighting along the corridor, and we discussed that this lighting as seen on State Street would be fitting for along 100 West as well, to provide ample lighting for the corridor for the pedestrian way. Another item is to include some kind of a pedestrian activity node, whether it's kind of a swing or an artistic display or some kind of a playground activities on a small scale at these mid-block crossings to have people want to stay a little bit, linger, something different along the corridor to enhance it. Another thing to give this corridor a unique identity was proposing to have the color of the amenities that are in the streetscapes to be changed to PMS 299, which is the color of this blue, of the Provo blue that we currently have. And so that would just be changing the seating, which are the benches, trash receptacle, bollards, bike racks, drinking fountains, and the street lights. So they all have this cohesive identity along, and it could give it some unique charm along the corridor. Another thing to incorporate is having raised seating walls along the corridor about every 4th tree location that will be in next to the trees. We currently have this as an option in the streetscape standards, but it's not as a requirement. This would require them to be along at least 100 West. I talked with our city arborist, and we were looking at adding an additional tree type for 100 West. He recommended the snow crabapple, which is a non-fruit dropping tree. So we'd have 2 types of trees along 100 West. So at certain times of the year, it would be flowering. And then lastly, this is just showing the layout of the streetscape standard, showing the text, which includes what I talked about for the street name, pedestrian activity node, street lighting, and the seat walls, and also including the standard paver layout for corners and for mid-block crossings along this corridor. And lastly shows the street cross-section for the 100 West. Yes?
So I like pavers because if you have to rip something up, it's easy to put it back together instead of cutting and redoing cement or whatever.
Mm-hmm. They're harder to maintain though.
Because of weeds?
Snow removal and weeds and...
Well, this is, yeah, so are they going to be in the walkways or in between?
Walkways and also in between. Yeah.
Real quick, I'm Jared Penrod with Public Works. The crosswalks themselves will be similar. They'll be the same as on Center Street, where it's actually it looks like pavers, but it's a thermoplastic heat tape that's baked onto the asphalt. So in the roadway, that's what those will be.
But as for this actual pathway, it will be similar to what's in the right of way. It will be the same along. Because that would be considered part of the sidewalk.
Excellent, thank you very much. We'll be hearing this tonight, so if you have other questions, you can that's supposed to read her tonight. Thank you for that presentation. So, Mr. Decker, thank you for your patience. We will now go return to item number 8, the discussion about wastewater recommendations, treatment resolution, and code changes.
Thank you very much. We appreciate the time to talk again about the wastewater treatment plant. And we want to spend most of the time on two specific items that are on the regular session tonight, the 5:30 session. There are two resolutions. I think it's item 8 and 9. It's the last two items on the 5:30 agenda. And we just wanted to make sure that the council was comfortable moving forward with these two resolutions or answering any questions that we might that you might have. So the first resolution that we're going to talk about is one regarding site selection and process selection. And you may recall in the process that we have taken with the state DEQ board in making an application and the variance letter. Well, it really started with the variance letter that we submitted probably a year and a half ago now, and asking for a variance from the 2020 regulations back to 2025, and asking for that variance. They set three deadlines actually. One has already passed that we have met, but there are two deadlines in 2019 that are approaching. One May 1st, and then one on December 1st of this year. And this resolution that you see before you would meet the May 1st requirement and basically commits us to a specific process and a specific site, and telling the DEQ board that it is our intent to move forward with both the process and the site selection. So there are a number of whereases, and I'm not going to review every single one of them. Most of them I think you're familiar with, and we can pan down through these, or you can look on your on the version that was submitted with the council information. And if you do need if you do need a latest copy, if you don't have access to it, we do have hard copies. I think Jimmy's got a couple of hard copies that we can distribute to anybody that needs a copy of this resolution. But I think I think the main I'll come back to the whereases in just a second. But I think the main part that I want to review with the council today is the resolution on the toward the bottom. It's about halfway down, and it says, "Now therefore let it be it resolved by the Municipal Council of Provo, Utah, as follows." And then part 1 says, "The council requests the Provo staff to continue with the design and construction of the new Provo water center at the existing site using membrane bioreactor technology, and to accomplish it, the Provo staff is requested to work closely with the DEQ board." And it goes on. And then the second paragraph also indicates our proposed budget. So there's a $93 million construction budget that's mentioned in the second paragraph, and then some additional budget in follow-up in the coming years. So I wanted to make sure that the council understood where those numbers are coming from. Those are consistent numbers with the application that was originally submitted to the DEQ board for the loan. Gary Calder and Rebecca and several of their staff members submitted this information to the board. We've reviewed it, and we do have some additional information that will probably help you feel a little bit more comfortable in the presentation. But I wanted to make sure that you understood where the numbers are coming from, and it's relatively consistent with what we have proposed to both the DEQ board and to the council in the past. So are there any concerns, at least at this point, on that resolution? I know there was one, in the previous meeting, in the previous presentation that we made to the city council, there was a little bit of concern, I guess, expressed about the fact that we had selected the existing site for the upgrades, basically, of the existing treatment plant, rather than building it out by the airport. And I think in that previous presentation, I explained it was largely because the initial loan request that we had made to DEQ had, the $120 million that we had requested had not come through from the board, and so it really put us in a position where, from a financial, almost strictly from a financial position, we had to select the existing site. It enabled us to use a couple of the existing facilities, primarily the Headworks building and the UV building, which have both recently been upgraded. There's significant cost savings in utilizing those two buildings. But essentially between those two buildings, everything on the hydraulic side of the treatment plant is being replaced, being built brand new. So the bioreactors, and I think we have may have a slide that shows this. Jimmy or Rebecca, do we have a slide that shows the site with the bioreactors? Yeah, this is the slide that, and you've seen this before. Corey Christiansen from Waterworks, who is representing Arcadis and Waterworks, he used this in his slide presentation. So the Headworks building is up in this area right here. The UV building is down right there, and essentially we're taking the process from the Headworks and taking it through the trains, is what we call them. And these are individual treatment trains that can be taken offline. They can function. So this one right here could be taken offline with the rest of them functioning. And then as the effluent exits this area, it goes through the UV and then back out into the mill race. So again, we're essentially replacing the entire plant between those two facilities. But again, it enables us to use two key facilities that are very expensive to replace. It also, as far as the north end of the plant, what we call the solids process, the digesters and some of the part that's along the north end of the plant, it keeps that in place. We do not replace it with phase one. And again, save some money from for the city, at least in the initial phases of the project. So that's the plan right now. That's largely, I mean, very quickly why we selected the existing site over the airport site. And I think, again, we discussed that at length in the last presentation, but we wanted to make sure that the council was comfortable, especially given the fact that we're passing a resolution potentially tonight with that commitment.
Dave, and this is my fault, and I am a little wondering why we even considered the other point. If this is cheaper, we can do it just as well. Why did we consider that other site?
Well, in phase one, it is, and again, it's mostly constraining us because of the loan from the state to stay with phase one. But with phase two, we still have planned to come back in and replace those digesters. And potentially, particularly the Headworks building, and Mark is here. I apologize, I didn't introduce staff today, but Mark Ogren, our treatment plant manager, is in the back. And although we have upgraded the Headworks building, it's certainly not in pristine, brand new condition. And there is some still concern about the capacity. So the likelihood, even if we use the Headworks building in this first phase, the likelihood of replacing it in the second phase is fairly high.
So then what I'm understanding is that we just can't afford to build a new spot.
Not with the loan that came from the state. If we're going to stay within the $78 million loan, plus, and it's important to understand, the city is contributing a pretty significant amount. You got to realize we're committing to a $93 million budget on it. So Provo City is making up the difference between 78 and 93 for the construction. So we're making a sizable commitment here financially to the treatment plant. But given the loan, given where we're at with the loan right now from the state, that is the recommendation we're making to the council.
But it works, right?
It does.
That's the key issue.
It does. It works.
There was an issue too of downstream flow, right? That the new plant was going to be more efficient in terms of the drainage that would go, because you're pumping back up to here, right, from the west.
Yeah. So there was a question at one time if some of the longer duration council members can remember, probably 4 or 5 years ago, we came up with a plan that in the collection system, and you'll actually see this in the presentation, the latter part of the presentation. You'll see the collection system as we plan it. And we had planned near the airport what we called a lift station, a master lift station, which would eliminate about 5 smaller lift stations on the west side. Well, after about 6 months of that plan, we started throwing out this idea, well, maybe we should move the treatment plant there instead of putting the master lift station and pushing everything back to the east. And so that's kind of what generated the original idea of putting the treatment plant out on the west side. But the initial cost is higher because you build your complete solids, train has to be there, plus your hydraulic. But it would eliminate probably 1 lift station, that master lift station, from pumping it back to the east. So from an efficiency standpoint, the west side scored a little bit higher than the east side did. And again, if you remember, we had we did a site comparison on 4 different sites. The 2 that were the closest scoring was the existing site and the west side site. And the west side site actually scored a little bit better in that site selection. But given where we're at financially and what we've done also in the existing site, so one of the reasons that the existing site scored a little bit worse than the west side was geotechnical concerns. So we've gone in and we've done a massive amount of geotechnical investigation in between that site study and today, where we're fairly convinced at this point that we're not going to run across construction material or something that's been put there years ago and create a problem for us. We've also, Corey mentioned this in the last presentation, we've talked about building the hydraulic side of this plant higher so that we don't have to pump as many times. So right now through the treatment plant we pump, is it 3 or 4 times?
4 times.
4 times through the treatment plant. Those are all cost operating the treatment plant. So right now the plan, we will continue to use, those are the primary clarifiers, Mark, is that?
Yeah.
So right now the plan is to continue to use those 2 primary clarifiers, but this part of the new part of the hydraulic side of the plant will be built so that we will not pump through that hydraulic system. So once these 2 primary clarifiers are replaced in phase 2, so we'll only pump once through the whole plant. It'll be twice, during this, after the first phase is completed. So I think we're trying to make, given all the factors here, and again, financial is one of the big factors. But given all the factors that we're facing, the recommendation from the staff is to build at the existing site.
So given a bunch of lemons, you made lemonade.
We're trying to do the very best we can and keep all of our options open.
Trying to make lemonade out of sewage problems.
Thanks for going there, So that's the recommendation that we have on that resolution to the council tonight. Any other questions on that one? So let me move to the next resolution.
It's going to be on the 9th of April, the resolution, not tonight.
Oh, it's not?
Okay.
The variance and the loan approval are coming tonight.
Never mind, I was wrong.
Yeah, and I think it's a code change?
Yeah, code changes.
2 title tags is coming out related to the wastewater system scheduled for April 9th. So this is coming.
So let's just clarify. So this is coming tonight,
Yes.
and the next one is also coming tonight. That's
If the next one is the loan ordinance.
yes, it is. So the next one is a much shorter resolution, and it has to do with the $78 million loan that's coming from the state. And it essentially authorizes, the council authorizes the mayor to sign the project cost and loan origination fee application form through the state of Utah revolving loan. So again, it's a much shorter resolution and basically indicates that it is the intention of the city to accept the loan that the state has offered, and we continue the process, and the mayor is authorized to sign the application fee, or the application form, I apologize. and to continue to move forward with that loan. And you can see the interest rate is identified in the resolution, the loan amount is identified. So again, it's a fairly short resolution, but it indicates to the DEQ board and to the DEQ staff that it's our intent to accept that loan that they have offered and to move forward as we've indicated.
Hey, just out of curiosity, why are we not hearing anything, or did we hear on the 120 million one? It just didn't. Why couldn't we get that?
So from a timing standpoint, we ended up making an application to the DEQ board about the same time that I can think of at least 2 other applications. There might have been a third in the process. So Logan City had approached the board for an increase in their loan. So they had originally had a certain amount. I don't remember the exact numbers, but they ended up coming back and asking for more money from the DEQ board about the same time our application was submitted to the board. Also, Central Valley, which is I think it's the largest district in Salt Lake County, they made an application for money from the board also right at the same time we did. And so it just came down to the fact that they're out of money in that revolving loan. By the time they considered those 3 large applications, I think there was 1 or 2 smaller ones. But they just simply didn't have the money to give us the $120 million.
And it sounds like we did as well as anybody at all.
We did. And Central Valley didn't get the entire amount that they requested either. Any other questions on that resolution? Okay, so we're gonna move forward and keep you on time schedule for. We're just going to move on to one other topic. We have made a commitment in past presentations to the councils regarding a memo and some maps. And we go to the next slide for just a minute here. So this map, kind of the base map behind it, I hope you remember seeing this in past presentations. And we have a memo, and we've got hard copies that Jimmy will hand out. And this memo actually, we've drafted it from both Public Works and Community Development, and probably would look to the council for some direction now on development activity, particularly on the west side, but not just uniquely to the west side. So this map, this base map, was generated with the idea behind the modeling indicating what kind of capacity we have. And as you recall, the red area identified on that map does not have sewer capacity at all at this point. I think the orange is the next grade up where it has limited sewer capacity, but probably some capacity issues also associated with it. Yellow is the next one up, and then green is the next category where there's probably not capacities, although we might run into some individual lines that still might have capacity. So when we first presented this map to the council, we indicated that we will continue to model in the green, orange, and yellow areas. We'll continue to model sewer capacity, and we'll probably have to take the development applications on a case-by-case basis. And that's exactly what we're doing. So in the last couple of weeks, you've seen a few applications for rezone come through the council, and I think a few of you have asked why did that particular rezone get approved over another one. One that I can recall sat right there on that corner right there, and you can see it's just barely inside that yellow, very close to the west side lift station. And given the improvements that we're doing to the west side lift station, which are right now under construction, we anticipate that project will be done well in advance of the development approval. And so we felt comfortable making the recommendation to the council to allow that rezone. And again, they're going to be case by case. And again, Shane, Rebecca, Gary, very, very much involved in that modeling effort. And we're watching it very closely. So I want to come back to this map, and let's go back to the first slide, if you don't mind. So in the CIP presentation that was done by Dustin earlier, we had a large number of projects. There were a lot of lines on that CIP list that Dustin presented. And it might be a little bit confusing kind of understanding where all these pieces of CIP projects, how they all fall together. And so my intent today is to help the council kind of understand that CIP list. And we've broken it up a little bit differently. We've color-coded it, and we've also have a map so that you can see how these projects go together in a map form. And I think it'll make a little bit more sense instead of just looking at it in a list form. So this is a spreadsheet that Gary and his staff have worked with Jimmy McKnight in the back. And Jimmy and Gary and the staff have done just a fantastic job in making sure we understand financially where we're headed. You know, for that, and you can see we go out to 25, and we're actually starting to talk about projects beyond 25. So we're more than 5 years out in looking at CIP projects. So this list now will appear by fiscal year next to the map, and I'm gonna take this list. And again, if you're interested in getting this spreadsheet or the maps, we're happy to send them to you. So if we can go to the next slide, we're going to take the year 2019, and we're showing you the same list over here on the right-hand side, and we're showing you what's going to be built in map form. So right now on this map, we're showing, and this was actually a last year project. In 2018, we built the line that went out to Duncan Aviation, and I think most of you know the commitment that we made. We have a contract out right now to Whitaker Construction to build what is identified in blue. That's an $11 million contract, and it's significant. It's the backbone, what I'm calling the backbone of the West Side collection system, and they're well underway. They're doing what I would consider a very good job in making that happen. But you can see also in 19 there are smaller projects, especially these ones that appear in blue. Some of them, many of them, are much smaller projects. You can see one that's over on 2770 West. Well, let me see. Maybe that's the next year. I apologize. I probably jumped 1 year, but you can see we're doing some pretty small projects in some locations just to get some existing capacity. You should know we're doing, Bulldog. We're doing some other 500 West. Why those roads are being torn up, we're doing some repair on the sewer line. So we haven't ignored the fact that we still have road projects that are kind of dictating certain utility needs on those roads. So you can kind of see where that 2019 list comes from. We've identified just the significant projects, and again, mostly on the west side. So let's skip to the next slide. And we went to 20. We didn't skip the year 2020, by the way. There really is no other projects funded in 2020 right now outside of the treatment plant. So right now the focus is we're just talking about the collection system right now. So mostly in 2020 we have projects that are either funded, partially funded in the year 2019, but I'm intentionally not just skipping 2020. So let's go to 2021 and talk about the projects, and you can see, no, sorry, stay there on 21. There you go. So you can see the projects that we built in the current fiscal year, and you can see the projects that will come in 21, and that will extend up the West Side the Lakeview Parkway, going to the northwest corner of the city. And we also start down here putting in the force main that comes over to the 36. Notice that the master lift station that I mentioned before is not funded in this year, even though we're doing the force main that will eventually be utilizing that force main. But we're putting it in because we can afford to do it in 21. And you'll see in the next year, so let's get to 2022 now. So in 2022, now you see the master lift station start construction right there, utilizing the force main. Now, at that point, and it's important to understand the base map that's behind these projects, this color coding is going to start to change once that master lift station goes into effect and we have the force main over to the 36. some of this red area right here and this area right here, although some of it's Delta restoration, but some of it that's right now coated in red will not be red anymore. They'll be able to develop that once that master lift station is in place. Does that make sense? Please.
So would it be fair to say that some parts of the red will always be red?
Yeah, because we color-coded some of this as, I don't know, Rebecca, I probably ought to ask. Rebecca, is some of that the Delta Restoration Project?
Yeah, so there's the Delta Restoration Project up there. There's also south of the Lakeview Parkway that's within the city that's not intended to be developed, and it'll always be red.
But you're not showing this as it changes, you're not showing us
No.
what turns green.
No, and I didn't, I specifically asked the staff not to change this map because one of the things that we need to talk about, and we'll finish through the projects, but one of the things that we need to talk about is we have some challenges with the priority, the list that we've generated, the spreadsheet that I mentioned that Jimmy's prepared. We already have some shuffling that needs to happen with those projects. Please.
I appreciated the comment earlier, because I looked at this and said, wow, we've got a quarter to a third of the city that doesn't have, sewer service, and, we need to fix that. That now looking at, like, what is actually planned to be developed, it's actually a lot smaller than that. And so, I don't know if in future updates, if land's not intended to ever be developed, maybe just have gray or something so we see like what areas need focus.
Take it off the map. Yep. But you can see, my hope in putting this in map form was to be able to see how those pieces all come together and kind of understand the financial commitment and picture that we're putting together here for the council. So it's not all going to happen in 1 year, but over 3 or 4 years, we get a pretty good step ahead. At this point, in about 2022, the limiting factor is actually going to be the existing 36-inch line that we've talked about before, the parallel line. So in the next year, so Kelsey, if you want to, or sorry.
Oh, I think we both did it.
Sorry. So you can see in the, does this have the parallel? We start to fund. This is the year that we start to fund the parallel 36, and we actually fund this over 3 years because we can't afford, again, we can't financially afford to do the parallel 36 all in 1 year. So we actually fund it over a 3-year period. So the likelihood of it not being done until 2025, it's probably, that's about the year that it'll be done. Please.
So with regard to the restoration project, I mean, I know the Agriculture Commission has been looking at, helping certain property owners have options with a land trust or something, some way to preserve that open space. Is there any reason that this would be rendered overdone if some of that space is preserved that is not currently anticipated to be preserved, or so I'm having a hard time like sort of picturing how the balance is worked out this many years out.
Yeah, so in the modeling, we have been careful. This map probably gives a, I think this was done in GIS, and we probably took a lot more liberty with this map than what the model is looking at. So I think the modeling, we're very careful not to put in land that we anticipate will not be developed in the future. So I don't believe we've included, Rebecca, you can correct me, but I don't think we've included the Delta Restoration Project.
Well, so this is an existing capacity map. This is not a master plan map. This is not saying what's going to happen when it's full build out. When we do the design of like the West Side Outfall, we do a master plan and base it on what growth could happen and what areas could develop and so forth. But this map is an existing capacity map. So this just says if today somebody comes in and wants to develop, these are the areas where the capacity has problems and other areas where it's not so much of a problem.
But if I understood the question, maybe I interpreted it differently. The size of this line has not been determined with the idea that all of that red area is going to go into it.
No, the Delta Restoration Area was not included. Things south of the Lakeview Parkway were not included. None of that was included in the design, but we did talk with community development and verify what was potential for development on the west side.
So it's not assuming some sort of foregone conclusion that, you know, in 5 years, everything north of Provo River is going to be developed. We know that that's not likely, but you would have enough capacity to handle whatever development does come.
Yeah, and in fact, if you want me to take kind of the next step in that question, one of the concerns that, you know, one of the things that we have really debated hard is what's the right density. And again, given the West Side master plan that was recently adopted, we went forward, we gave ourselves a little bit of safety factor in the design of those pipes, because those pipes are going in now based on that master plan. And if that density were suddenly to change dramatically, that would make some issues that in the future, you know, you won't see that tomorrow, but at some point in the future, someone would have a challenge.
So George, you remember touring Ladon Christensen's property. It's just north of the river and out by the lake. They've gotten the go-ahead. That's going to get the development rights bought by the Nature Conservancy.
That's very helpful. Thanks.
Go ahead.
So just for the benefit of the council, so if a large grocery store came into the west side today, either north, south, or middle, can you speculate on that for a second?
It's going to be a challenge from a capacity. The further west, particularly if it's in that one of those red areas, even in one of the orange areas, we're likely going to have a challenge. Getting it there. It's a similar challenge that I mentioned. I kind of alluded to the fact that we are even with the airport, we're going to have to juggle some of those projects that are on the list right now. You can notice there's a few spots right now that are identified that do not have a pipe, even a backbone pipe in the close vicinity planned, and we're going to have to figure out how to get sewer into some of those locations. And some of them are going to be development, some of them could be economic development, some of them could be airport related. So
definitely we've rearranged our priorities. We keep doing that, whether it's for the high school or for the airport, and I would certainly recommend it if we could get a grocery store.
Yep. And it's going to have to be the tactic. I tried to, I think the staff is responsive and kind of understanding. This is a plan, but it doesn't mean that it's fixed in concrete. We are going to have to be flexible with this, and we already know that. It's potentially going to change, and so that's part of the reason that I was a little concerned about changing the base map behind it, because I don't want somebody to latch onto it and say, oh, in 2024 this is what it's going to look like, because it's likely going to change. That priority list is going to change. But I think it's important for the council to understand how, you know, what's the plan. There is a list there, and as we work with the administration through the budget process, you know, again, some of those priorities may have to be juggled a little bit, but there clearly is a plan, and that list largely, the priority and the planning largely comes from that spreadsheet that's been prepared by Jimmy. So, please.
I don't know if you can go to the top where Provo Canyon is. There's a red spot up there at the mouth of the canyon. And is there any plan for that area? That's been an area where people have wanted to develop.
Is this up east of Canyon Road? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
It just means that there's no gravity sewer right now. It doesn't mean that there can't be gravity sewer, and they're just going to have to connect to it and so forth. Some of these areas are more difficult to connect to on the west side, though, because they not only don't have gravity, but they don't have, they can't get to gravity without a lift station. So the Provo Canyon one is slightly different, but because it doesn't have sewer of it right now, we're showing it as red.
So I think from this last part of the conversation, really, this memo that Jimmy handed out, I think our recommendation again to the council is that if there are any applications, and you can pan down and go back to the previous map, either one.
The slides? Or you?
Yep, right here. So essentially in the memo, we're recommending anything that is that has a current application for development or rezone for that matter in the city, that we deny those applications for the time being. It may change again, over the next couple of years, but anything that we have active right now, we're recommending that we take action and just say right now we don't have capacity, we don't, and we won't for some time. So we spend quite a bit of staff time, and part of the reason that I wanted this memo to the council is we spend quite a bit of staff time with development that says, hey, we think we can fix the problem, we can do this or that, and it takes a lot of staff time, and I think it's important for the council, for the development community to understand, here's the plan moving forward. We do have a plan, we're going to have to be patient with it, but given where we're at right now, it's probably not prudent to spend a lot of staff time in developments in that red area.
Dave, how's that playing with the regional park proposal?
So from a timing standpoint, right now, I'm told that we're planning to close on the regional park, sometime in this year. I don't know the exact timing for development of it. It's probably a little bit ahead of the master lift station, but we're going to face the same problem with the airport. So, the conversation, I'll tell you what the conversation is going to turn into is this one, if you remember this line that went up Lakeview Parkway, it was higher priority. Remember, it showed up on the list before the master lift station and the force main. So the question is do we change that and do the master lift station and flip-flop them? Well, the problem is going to be the one that Dixon just raised.
Still waiting on the government decision, right, on the Timpview Municipal Park thing that would trigger the soccer complex. We can't do the soccer complex if we don't get that approved, right?
Yeah, we haven't heard a word yet. They warned us that it was going to take a long time, but what does a long time mean? I feel like it's been a long time.
Oh, I thought they said 6 months.
Yeah, I thought it was in July or so, and we thought we might hit it at some point, but.
So we've already started that conversation internally, and I'm not sure I can give you an answer right now.
Well, like I say, this is a plan.
And we're going to have to be flexible. Yep, we're going to have to be flexible with it. So I just wanted the council to see that, understand that recommendation in the, for development applications in the red area, and we do have a pretty good plan moving forward, but we're going to have to be flexible with it. Jimmy?
There's one more here.
Go ahead. So the primary thing that we show here on this one is the parallel 36 that comes over to the existing treatment plant. And again, at that point, it's a much better situation, but there still are, in the master plan, we show a line that would parallel the Lakeview Parkway right here. Again, we don't show anything currently out into the southwest corner of the city. So there are some other branches, and I think it's important to understand, even when this backbone is put in order to develop here, you're still going to need to make, pretty long sewer connections to that trunk line. And we've planned, for those connections to be made eventually, but development at that point probably will drive those needs. I hope that makes sense. Okay, any other questions? Anybody have? Okay.
Thank you for using the time so wisely and getting this out. little bit early. I don't think anyone's going to complain if we start our closed session 25 minutes early and be able to discuss those items in more detail. So unless there's an objection, I'll declare.
For the closed session?
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Mr. Jones, could you introduce the closed session to us?
Yes, my understanding is that there's been 3 items requested to be presented in closed session. 2 of them involve reasonably imminent litigation, and one of them, as I understand it, deals with property transaction. And so under those, all of those would qualify for a closed session. Someone wants to move?
Thank you. Look for a motion. Mr. Winterton, second. Mr. Handley. All in favor? Mr. Stewart? Raise your hand. All right. That's unanimous. You got away there, Mr. Nixon. I could spend days trying to get him to raise